How hard do you think the women's final was, and how hard do you think the men's final was?
To me, it looked like, let's just say where like Orient fell right before that kind of pinch sequence, where most of them got right above that. That to me looked like 13 plus, so like CD. So you already know just to get to like 60 points is like roughly 13 plus CD probably. Like it's certainly they're not getting that tired on 13B. It actually could be harder. Like you don't know. Yeah, my guess is that it's like a very hard 14B to actually send the thing, but maybe the route feels more like 14. Maybe it's 14C to send it just because that very last move looks so hard. And literally, you can get a grade for one movement, I think, in lead. I think a lot of people would have different opinions there, but I think to send the route probably be like 14BC, maybe right in between there. But maybe it feels closer to like low end 14B until you get to the last like 10 movements. Yeah, that's my feeling. And the men's route had to be like 14 plus. It always has to be 14 plus. These guys are shockingly good at on-sighting by 14 plus.
Timothy Kang. Tim, my dude, you're
My
back on the
dude.
pod.
I was waiting for the Tim, my dude.
It was there. It just took me a couple moments, and you're still my dude. Good to have you here. Always welcome here. And I can't help but notice, Tim, you're not in the closet, but more importantly, you aren't wearing the test piece shirt that I sent you. So I'm very disappointed in that you're wearing some nice collared shirt. You look very professional today, Tim.
Oh man, yes, I have a new job. I'm not in the house. I don't want to go into those details too much. But yeah, I apologize. I did see your shirt. I got it delivered, and I'll wear it next time for you, or I'll post something on Instagram. Um,
Ooh,
but yeah,
thanks, dude. That's like free advertising there. Yeah, I
oh
liked
yeah,
how I feel like Tim, we're not that different in size. I like you're maybe a little taller than me. We probably weigh about the same. Tim, you wanted the extra large. I wear a medium. And I just was like, all right, dude, there you go. So if anyone sees that ad from Tim and it looks a little oversized, that's how he wanted it. It's not the shirt's fault.
yeah. I know it's hard to get used to too, because my boss at work wants me to wear like regular clothing, and I'm like, I have to get used to wearing not XL or XXL.
Yeah, it's not that hard to get used to. It actually just fits. It's just that's how clothes are supposed to work, Tim. Uh, okay, Tim, you we haven't seen you in a while, and before we get into it, I well actually before we no, I'm going to give my super quick intro in case listeners haven't seen one of the millions of pods we've done, just in case. So my super quick intro, Tim, you're a badass pro climber. You are a competitor. I mean, you're a high level competitor, and that's actually one of the reasons why I'm super psyched about today's topic, the Olympics. But you're also a coach, which is really important thing for some of the topics we want to broach about the Olympics. I'd say you're most famous for Focus, that amazing film that followed you around in Bishop, where you did five ridiculously high and stupid and crazy high balls, but good job. And you also do extremely well in comps, and you've competed on the World Cup scene. And yeah, I mean, does that cover your whole entire life in 30 seconds? Is that
Yes,
good?
perfect. I
Okay.
appreciate the intro.
Okay, I just want to check in with you really quick. How's your knee doing? For those who don't know, Tim hurt his knee badly. I mean, I wouldn't say you completely exploded your knee like you fell off of one of those really high blocks, but you hurt your knee, and we all know as a high level climber that can be really really tough. And I just want to check in with how your recovery is going.
Yeah, it's going really good. I maybe for just life reasons and psych reasons, I hadn't climbed too much this year. But yeah, I partially tore my LCL in December, so like 8 months ago. But yeah, it sucked. It really, really, really sucked for a really long time. And but I climbed at Refuge, local gym in Vegas, um, a couple days ago, and I did my first like pretty hard heel hook on a pretty hard problem. And I had thought about it a lot. I looked at it, but I was like high up on this pretty hard problem on Flash. Put the heel hook on, and just like I was like, all right, let's just try it and see if it feels like anything. It didn't feel like anything, and so yeah, that's kind of how I expected it to go. But over a lot of testing, maybe like by month 4 and 5, I really was pretty discouraged that it wouldn't feel normal unless I did a lot of work. But honestly, I haven't really done too much work other than a lot of time off, and I think it doesn't feel. I think everything feels kind of shaky too. So like, it just happens when you're not climbing a bunch. So that helps a little bit. Kind of take all of my climbing with a head-on approach to be like, all right, how are we going to take care of the body and how are we going to stay back in shape? But yeah, I also haven't been in the comp scene for a good while. But yeah, I'm still coaching, and this, watching competitions and stuff still feels very relevant to me, and I do want to get back into the scene at some point. I have a lot of opinions for sure, so I'm really excited to talk and share some of my thoughts here.
Well, this is basically an emergency podcast episode. I don't really know. People say that sometimes, like, I don't really know what emergency podcast episode actually means, but the Olympics just happened and we were texting about it. And we said, "Oh my gosh, we got to talk about the Olympics. We got to dive in more than just texting back and forth, little few words. Actually, you don't text just a few words, Tim. There were some paragraphs, and yeah, I know you have strong opinions, and I'm excited to dive into them as someone who has, you may not be competing every week right now, but I know that you are steeped since your youth. I mean, that's got to be 8, 10 years on the comp scene all the way up through World Cups. And I really enjoyed watching the Olympics, and I can't wait to hear more about it from your point of view.
Yeah, man.
Okay, Tim, before we get into it, I'm doing a new thing on the pod where I ask you slash whoever the current guest is what you think the process is to go from good to great as a climber. So we're just starting out with that and then heading right into the greatest competition of all time, the Olympics. But Tim, what do you think? How do you go from good to great?
All right. So we're going to pretend that I haven't already done a bunch of these podcasts and try to, over the course of many hours and hours of long episodes, going into that. But in a couple of short sentences, this is what I came up with for today on what I think takes somebody from good to great. Checking in with yourself regularly about your priorities and the minimums required to make those priorities happen. With a humble and a neutral approach, with enough experiences and good guidance, you'll level up the best way you can. Keep checking in, keep making decisions, and that could mean doubling down on the same ones, but commit to them and commit to yourself. That's what I think.
Oh, that's good, man. Yeah, let's also point people towards any episode that we have done together in the past that probably touches on those topics in much greater detail. But one of the reasons why I asked is because opinions change. Life experiences can cause you to change what you think it is to go from good to great. And so, and it's also something that it's clearly not figured out in the world. Otherwise, we all be great.
Yeah.
And so, continuing to poke at it, continuing to hear it different ways, I think is always important. And now I just want to dive freaking straight into the Olympics, which I liked how I tied into your good to great by saying it's perhaps the greatest competition of all time for climbing. Uh, do you agree with that? Or let's just go in there. What did you think about the Olympics, man?
Man. Um, so I knew the results for all of the Olympics before I had watched all of the Olympics. And the results themselves, I was super excited for. Like it was just so exciting to follow along, knowing that Serato was basically leading every round and Toby won. And Serato ended up in silver, which is just like,
Oh yeah,
enough.
spoiler alert! By the way, lots of spoilers, all spoilers, nothing but spoilers, spoilers, and then some. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, your
that
boy. You're talking about your boy Serato. Go on, go on.
yeah, that's got to be a given. This is going to be many many spoilers. So if you somehow didn't watch the Olympics and you're listening to this podcast, I
Who
mean,
are you?
if you, any of
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
who are
Who
you?
who would
But
you even
yeah,
be?
shut it off and go watch the Olympics. Or if you just want to listen and get the thoughts, that's totally okay. And I wrote some notes keeping in mind that maybe some people didn't watch the Olympics and maybe just want some thoughts on like the thoughts behind it, like a super high level competition. But um, a couple of general thoughts for the Olympics in general. I watched a lot of other Olympic sports before I even watched climbing. Like in general, whenever the Olympics goes on, I'm just on, wherever it's streaming and just watching whatever sports live or like whatever's interesting. And that for me makes it elevated in its entirety that every sport that is in the Olympics is at the highest level. Supposedly all the highest level athletes are there. And like we already know the details of all sports. It's not like every of the highest level of athletes in each given sport is at the Olympics, but that's kind of the idea of it. It is supposed to be the highest level of competition, and every you know sport that the world takes seriously, again supposedly, because climbing took until 2020 to be there. And climbing's a serious sport. And I also feel like that was another thing I got away with the Olympics, was afterward how many people received climbing so well with the Olympics, or it seemed that way, was just so cool to me. I think speed climbing did a really good job of that. I think just how it looked in general, the videography looked awesome. It looked amazing with the Olympics this time around. But going back to the results, I was super psyched Toby won. We've had an entire podcast, or we're really going into the behind the thoughts of Serato and Toby coming into the comp climbing scene, and just like being this like new blood of mastery, and they're young, and both of them to be silver and gold is like pretty phenomenal. But also Jakob being in third place for the men's was just like so special. He wasn't in that high of a ranking, I think, in the other like leading up to there. And maybe you wouldn't have guessed he would get the podium, but I think a lot of real climbers hoped that he would be on the podium. I think you would hope that like Andra and Tomo would be on the podium, but honestly, Jakob just looked like in such good shape. I was really hoping he would be on the podium, so I was psyched to see that result. Moving to the women's, obviously having Brooke get us a US medal was super exciting. Jessie Pills for me was a very surprising one, and we'll probably get into that to get onto the podium. Not to say that she's not a phenomenal climber, but being a combined competition, and knowing her as predominantly a lead athlete for a really long time, that was a little bit surprising to me to get in an entire combined event. And then a couple of upsets that, it was like maybe a word tossed around in media. That to me, I wouldn't say that I felt like it was an upset to not see like Tomoa or like Megos, Natalia, Miho, those types of athletes in the final. I just understood how much more volatile this format was, and like how volatile setting was. So again, we're going to get into all that stuff, I'm sure, but those are a lot of my thoughts for general results.
Mm. You didn't even say Yanya and how she won gold, but
Do I have to?
I
That was
I
awesome.
actually
Made me feel good.
we should get into Yanya. I
Yeah.
know Yanya's a consistent topic for us. I Yeah, I gotta say I just want to echo what you said. Where I love the Olympics because you do see the highest level of the highest level, and I always think it's easy to spot excellence. And when you watch something like the 100-meter dash, where I don't know, I don't do that a lot, but I like watching it. It's so obvious that they're incredible. And what's funny is it looks incredible in that it kind of looks simple. Like when you see,
Mhm.
and you can take this in climbing too, when you see Yanya floating up the lead route, you're kind of like, I don't know, like doesn't even look that hard. And in some ways, like the beauty is in the the mundaneness of executing at such a high level. And so, dude, I freaking love the Olympics. I decided I'm going to the LA 2028 Olympics to watch climbing. I was like going. It's because I had so much fun watching the climbing, and I really, I kind of joked about this earlier where I said something like it's the greatest climbing event we've had, and I actually kind of want to like say that. I kind of want to say this was maybe the most important climbing event of all time. And for me, I'm kind of specifically talking about the combined of lead and bouldering. I I thought like what little bit I saw the speed, it's just beautiful. I love watching them just fly up the climb. I think it's really beautiful. I think it does good stuff for our sport. I didn't really watch it, unfortunately, but I'm guessing it was the biggest event for them as well because it was their single medal. But this was a big deal for me, Tim. I don't know. I just thought it was beautiful. I thought the setting was good. Everything, I just felt like it really progressed our sport and put us in a very beautiful light. And one of the reasons that that occurred was this camaraderie that we saw. I know it's kind of like, I was kind of like cheesy, like, oh, look at Yanya and Brooke hugging and they're so happy. But like, that was real. Like, it's not like they were doing
Yeah.
that to do it for TV. And there was a lot of cheering on of each other. And I just felt like climbing put a good foot forward. And that makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I do want to add a layer of I what I don't want to do on this podcast, Josh, and you can help me with this, is I don't want to just bash setting at any point. I've never really wanted to do that, but I will disagree on something. So I do think I agree highly with this being one of the most important climbing events of all time. I think just at the stage of where it's at, being the second Olympic event for climbing, being the first one where it's split medals. And if you guys don't know, Tokyo was super interesting. 2020 Olympics was super interesting because it was also one of the first climbing events ever to have if you had to compete in lead bouldering and speed all together for one medal, and that's just like unheard of. Most people who compete or climb don't do all three disciplines, and the only reason why a lot of people did that was in order to compete at the Olympics. Well, this time they did us a favor to respect our sport and to say, okay, all right, speed is a very, very different discipline, but hopefully over time, to be honest, those disciplines are split again into bouldering and lead and speed. And this a lot of stuff that I want to go into, like it's a completely different language that I'm seeing these athletes who are obviously specialized. Now it's really hard to tell the difference between like I think let's talk about the women because in the men's in the finalists, it's in my opinion a lot harder to see at their level. All eight of those guys seem pretty proficient in language in both bouldering and lead. But actually, you see a lot more specialization in the women's field in the finalists, except for Yanya and Brooke. Now, I saw that as an issue because the setting didn't really respect that aspect of it, where it's like there's a reason why I looked so good in lead and Hunt looked so good in lead and looked like they couldn't even boulder in boulders, right? And kind of vice versa in like some ways, but not so much in bouldering. And really the point that I want to make there is it seemed unfair, and we're going to use this word unfair in some sparing ways because I'm not trying to say at all. I hope we don't even talk about height too much because actually that's not what I thought was unfair. I thought style was unfair in terms of how much scores are weighted. I do want to go into this. I want to get your opinions on this, Josh, but like the scores didn't really make that much sense to me. And look, bouldering is worth 100 points, lead's worth 100 points. And that to me felt weird because I getting like damn near 100 points in lead, it didn't feel like the same amount the earnability is kind of what I want to talk about. In bouldering, there was four girls who had 59 point X. And that didn't seem as hard to get. And it also seemed in some way like the separation between the average score in lead and what I's, performance was. And I's performance, again, arguably was so far beyond almost everybody else's that it didn't really make sense to me that she couldn't earn those points. And so that for me was actually frustrating. It was frustrating. Again, this is my main emotion. Watching the entire women's final, I was extremely frustrated. And that was mostly for I Mori. I couldn't understand it. And she looked super frustrated. And watching her come off the lead final, it looked like she was obviously disappointed to not top that route, but actually it looked like she was disappointed for the entire event. And she had the best standing ovation, man. Like throughout the entire thing was after she did her lead rip. And so to see the score, she's not even on the podium. That for me was just like really hard. It was a huge grapple. So I just really wanted to share that. That was actually my main emotion for this, other than the importance of this event and just like where climbing is going and stuff.
Ooh, all classic Tim. I love that you're gonna be picking on stuff, and I think I think you did a good job of prefacing your kind of style where you're gonna critique, you're gonna tear apart stuff, but you still love the comp, and like that. That's fine, man. And also, Tim, we are going to disagree, and I love disagreeing because it's the most fun part
Oh
of
yeah.
talking, really. And I just want to point out, Mori, Japanese climber. She's 5'1". She's small. She's kind of infamous for being a great lead climber and not so good of a boulder in her very technical, ticky tacky, less dynamic, incredible finger strength style. And just wanted to kind of like set that stage. And something I want to push back on, because I was thinking about this as I was writing this up, is this idea of the combined event and medals. And just to give that little backstory, you did, but just to repeat it a little bit, in Tokyo, we had climbing was granted one medal, and everyone wanted that to be their discipline, whether it's bouldering, lead climbing, or speed. And so they said, okay, we're going to do it all and then come up with some silly scoring system to give a medal for just that one combined thing. And now we got two medals, I guess, because we did well enough that the Olympics granted us more medals. And I don't know what's coming for 2028. Maybe we get three medals. And so we broke it into lead and bouldering and speed. Yeah, everyone knows that. So I just want to put this out there where I want to argue that perhaps the combined of lead and bouldering is the best example of a climber. And the reason why I say that is because it made me think of gymnastics. And gymnastics, the way that it works is there's a team medal there's an all around medal where you have to compete on every single apparatus. And then there's individual medals for each apparatus. So, like Simone Biles is probably the one everyone's thinking of where it's like, okay, she won gold in all around, where she did all the events and did them better than everyone else. And then maybe she won gold in floor. Actually, I think she got silver. Anyways, poor Simone. Other goat, different sport. And the point is that I think there's something interesting about, like, perhaps it is cool to test climbers as both lead climbers and bouldering, especially because the styles are so different, as evidenced by Mori. But the counter argument to this, or maybe the nuance there, is what I'd still like to see is also individual medals in addition to the combined
Yeah.
medal for lead and bouldering. But I thought that was that made me think when I was thinking about gymnastics.
You make a really good point about like what demands someone to say they're the best climber, and yeah, I mean they probably should be able to lead climb and boulder, right? Um, and I agree with that fundamental idea. That just the problem comes when you're saying, and the question here that I have is the bouldering round, and because I can say, and this is kind of, is the bouldering round a good representation of who are the best boulderers? And that's a huge question in competition climbing as a whole. So I do want to go into that. Clarification question for gymnastics specifically, and I wish I knew this. Maybe you know, maybe a lot of the listeners don't know this. For that combined medal, is it a different event, or do they actually just compile the results from individual events, or do they actually have to compete twice?
Compete twice.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So in climbing, I would love to see that too, because something I thought was super interesting was there's a totally different strategy from doing a bouldering round into a lead round than doing like a whole bouldering round and a whole lead round. And yeah, that's a ton, but like also I feel like Olympians in general have a choice to go and compete, or like, or maybe they're qualified for that team, but I don't know, I feel like everyone would be down for that. I would definitely be down for that, to like be able to compete for my combined spot and then each individual medals. And I also know, sorry, another thing to take into account is that the Olympics has to kind of set up how many medals are given to each sport too. So there's a degree of like, all right, climbing was this debut in 2020, so like, why are we going to give you guys so many medals for this sport? Let's see if climbing is a well-respected sport. So there's just a degree of that might be the thing that actually dictates it over time. And we can assume that climbing was received well just from seeing everything. So maybe that alone will allow us more medals. But you made a really good point there.
Yeah, I was always on board with these need to all be separate medals, and bouldering's really different than lead, and of course different than speed. And I kind of took a step back and thought maybe that should be a medal in itself, because it is interesting seeing people excel at both. And something that you were talking about with the scoring that I thought was really interesting is the there was 100 total possible points for lead climbing, 100 total possible points for bouldering. With lead climbing, it was 100 if you reach the top of the route, with additive points for each hold. A little more complex than that, let's just put it like that. And then in bouldering, theoretically, if you topped every boulder, you could get 100 points less some tries that took off a tenth of a point. So there was some talk beforehand where perhaps that meant that lead was more heavily weighted, because people thought that if you were good at lead, it would be easier to get to the top. But then even if you're good at bouldering, getting four tops is, I feel like, a little less guaranteed than if you're good at, there's just more variability. There's more nuance in the setting if you can't quite get that coordination move right. And I thought that was, yeah. So the thought was, is that it's probably good to send someone who's really good at lead and someone who's really good at bouldering, and hopefully that the score will take care of itself, and the specialist who ended up doing well in that discipline, and that discipline counting more, will win. um,
Yeah.
but I got to point out that Yanya Yanya's score on bouldering and lead was almost identical. And I thought that was a good show on the setting. Like that seems really difficult to me. And I want to toss this back to you, because you're talking about Imori doing so well in lead. And I just, there's some nuances there that's really tough to tease out. But I want to argue that I thought, all things considered, they did a pretty good job, as evidenced by Yanya's score, as well as even Imori doing so well on lead and not so well on bouldering.
Yeah. So yeah, all really good talking points. Before I go into some more some more thoughts about the setting specifically, I do want to say that um like results wise, it ended up the way that we wanted it to, I think, and like the way we might have expected it to. But there was moments where I was watching and like specifically Yanya almost not topping boulder number two. I think it was a slab where you had to do this like turnaround sequence, and her, I mean, she was literally crying at the end of it, and it seemed like she knew how risky that was. Like almost like that your entire Olympic gold medal could be on the weight of you not doing this type of sequence. And I do want to generalize just like bouldering, it's so much more crucial to pay attention to the types of sequences that you have available to you. For example, men's boulder number three, I think, in the finals. Correct me if I'm wrong, or it really doesn't matter the exact specifics here. It's the boulder where it started off with a small coordination move to this big paddle dyno, which Hamish ended up not doing the paddle dyno, skipping just straight to this jug.
I think
And
that's
then you
boulder
had
number
to
2.
okay,
Sorry. Yeah.
and you had to lash onto this platform and stick two
Oh no,
fingers
that was
into
boulder
this
number
little
4.
pocket.
Sorry, that's
That was
boulder
end
number
boulder.
4. Yeah, end
That was
boulder.
last boulder. So that boulder as well, like uh, it was cool that Colin was the only person to do that, but you see how much it cost Serato and Toby for not doing it. And that just sucks. Like it just sucks to know that it costs a lot, or maybe it doesn't suck. For me personally, it sucks to know that that much of a score, it costs them that much of a score if they don't do this. And it could just be that quick of a margin where my understanding of bouldering in its entirety is much more like, I think it's women's boulder three. I really should have just written all this stuff down. Actually, I did. Women's boulder number three, where they called this the power boulder, which is also something I hated. And I also want to make a comment, or maybe we can talk about this a little bit later about commentating. I don't want to bash on commentating too much because I think it's a really difficult job, but I really think that they should have stronger standards for especially newer sports and like really complex sports on what they're supposed to describe to, especially to audiences that don't know what they're watching. And also just saying stuff like power boulder, where that's actually just completely inaccurate to what the rest of the round was. Like there was a lot more power shown on the lots of other women's boulders, to be honest. Like even that first boulder was way more powerful than I would call the boulder number three a difficulty boulder. There's a lot more difficulty you're seeing and a lot more technique and a lot, it's a roof. There's a lot of power in it and a lot of strength required in it, but honestly, it's a difficulty boulder. And just seeing that boulder where there's a solving process, there's a lot of different pathing for different size climbers and different strengths that you have, and using your different strengths accordingly. Like I think there should just be a question process, in my opinion, and this is really my point here with the setting style. There should be a question process from the setters, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen or this just needs to get better. Where what are we trying to test? And what does it cost these athletes? What is the scoring format? What's the timing format? Because in 4 minutes, it's not really realistic that Yanya is going to be able to. It's not really realistic that Toby and Serato are going to be able to showcase their best abilities very consistently. Is that something that people are worried about? Are they worried about that in the competition setting? Like it seems like that's just a whole process where that maybe that's missing. Because you risk these things really causing enormous impact to these people's scores, where there was a huge possibility that Yanya just didn't win just based off that one boulder, and it just so happens that she did, right? But that's what I'm saying. Results based, yeah, it ended up fine. But I was watching and I was like stressed the entire competition, dude. Like that's what I was feeling. I was stressed. I was like, these guys, what if these guys don't get the medals? Like these guys are the best.
I mean, I gotta point out, it sounds like the setters did the perfect job. Then you were stressed. It was razor thin. Where if Yanya had just messed up
Drama.
that boulder, yeah, total drama. So number 3 on both the men's and the women's was on the right side of the wall, and it was that steep section, and they were actually the power boulders, which I agree with you, where it seemed like boulder number 1 was actually probably more powerful, but it was kind of like the classic power of like that technical steep finger strength and body power. And those are my favorite boulders, were boulders number 3. No big surprise as kind of an older school climber. But first of all, I'm pretty sure that the setters probably have these discussions. Like I don't think that they're just kind of winging it. Like they're like, what do we want to test? And then as far as boulder number 4 on men's and how much that changed the potential results, I would argue that they probably did it perfectly, in the sense that one person did it, and it was Colin Duffy, and he just happened to stab, like, dude, the video that like, so yeah, it was a Lachey, huge dynamic move, super committing, and then you had to stick like a 2-finger pocket, but not a 2-finger pocket, like a double mono pocket, super accurate, and he barely did it. And at least someone did it though. Where on women's, that's actually when I was looking at the setting for bouldering, I would actually argue that the boulder that was the biggest failure, or that's pretty brutal. The least successful boulder on the women's bouldering was number 4 because no one topped it. And to me,
Hmm.
that just always means it's a little overcooked because someone should top
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
man. Okay, I want to go back into this. I've heard this so many times before, where results then indicate whether a boulder was successful or not. And I just want to challenge that. I also want to challenge the fact that route setters have that discussion, because we've already had some discussion with some route setters saying, like, at the highest level, and we're not going to disclose who or what that discussion exactly was, but that they actually seem to not have that process fully under wraps, and that's okay. Like, I do want to reiterate and say that it's okay that these things aren't set up. Josh, like, it's okay that these things aren't set up. I just want to challenge if they are, because I'm seeing gaps in gray area in the quality of setting for what we're trying to accomplish, for what rock climbing competitions maybe quote unquote should be. And so again, going back to, let's just talk about specifically boulder number 4 for men's. So boulder number 4 for men's there, what I understood from why Colin did the boulder was because he was able to identify for that specific movement, whether that was on his first try or over the course of many tries, he was able to identify exactly what would grant him the least amount of volatility to stick this 2-finger pocket. What I saw, and if you really compare his video specifically on that motion, was he did a really good job of having speed and arc exactly. So he slowed down by far the most out of any other competitor. So actually, I'm saying that Serato and Toby didn't try that movement the best way in order to have the least amount of volatility for that movement. And that should cost somebody, but not so much. And also with 4 minutes in there, like, basically my thought here is that if both Serato and Toby had like another try or two, I feel like they certainly would have done the climb. And that's, you know what I'm saying? That's the thing I have a
I
problem with,
agree.
is that I
Yeah.
don't really like seeing that. It's like, no, like, these guys certainly would have done this. Yanya as well on that slab. If she hadn't done it in that, like, minute left, she certainly would have eventually. That's what I'm not really liking. And that, again, just my personal opinion, but if anybody's watching that bouldering round and not really understanding why there's so much drama in that, again, I don't have a problem with drama. I do kind of have a problem with it though at the Olympic level, at the highest level, when we're really trying to get a podium of medalists to say that these people are representing the highest level of our sport. We kind of have to agree as a sport to say, is that the highest level of representation for that discipline? Because I agree with you. I think the biggest colossal failure in the women's round, and that's a strong statement, is boulder number 4 in the women's round. Not only because nobody did it, but also the style was like kind of repetitive. I watched that boulder and I was like, that's kind of the same as the first boulder. It was just a kind of different thing. And I really like the fact that there's this like really tricky slab, like really like old school type of boulder and a coordination boulder. It's like, okay, so if you have 4 boulders available to you to set, maybe you should keep asking questions of what are we trying to test. And if they had done that process and somehow got to the conclusion of we can have 2 coordination boulders and this type of coordination boulder can exist, that's my thought process. That's why I'm questioning it. Is that if they had done that and they came to that conclusion, well, then I have a million questions. I have way more questions than how I feel right now. So yeah, that again, sorry.
Yeah, Tim, I enjoy your, I don't know how to put it in a nice way. Just it's really tempting for me to just watch and be like, that was cool, that was exciting, and not, view it from these different angles where as someone who's competed a lot and coached a lot, and coached people who have been through these comps and struggled for one reason or another. I think that you have a different view on it. Just like when my mom watches it and she is maybe gleeful for some move that I think is like mundane and boring. So I enjoy you peeling off the other layer. So don't let me stop you from being critical. And the pushback I would have for you is that while we are looking for the best competitor at that on that date, I think it's interesting that you point out where given one more try, Serato and Toby. I agree. Sorry, given one more try, I do agree that Serato and Toby would have done that move. Given one more try, if Yanya hadn't done that move, she had licked that slab. She knew it. She knew it inside and out. After, if she had slipped there, she would just hop back onto it. But you also have to set the goalpost somewhere. You have to say it's
Yeah.
4 minutes, and so I'm not so sure. Yeah, I don't know. That those are my
Yeah.
my pushbacks to you.
And I will say, given what you're saying, like maybe my issue, and maybe a lot of people's issue with watching this type of competition, if they have one, is more in the format and the constraints that we are setting for our sport. And it's again, it's like it's the way it is right now. You're right. It's how the Olympics are, but I am gonna be one advocate to say I'm not happy with that. I'm just not. So again, I don't think that's wrong. And I wish more people were saying stuff like that so that there could be change in the future. Because what I want to think about is, what does 2028 look like? What does 2032 look like? What does 2036 look like? What does 2040 look like? Like, I just want to keep pushing the ceiling towards what I would like to see, what I understand are the best athletes. Because again, it just so happened that we got some of those medals there to some of our best athletes in climbing. But there is a reason why we don't have some of our best rock climbers competing. And that's just something that I'm kind of trying to touch on a little bit.
Love it. Let's we're kind of in the women's category right now, and we just went over bouldering. Let's switch to lead with women. And I got to point out, talk about stress. When I saw Yanya hurt her finger on boulder number 4, clearly like look at her finger and be like, what the heck? Like, what did I do? And you could see her get a little flustered. And yeah, I mean, dude, I was like, is she really hurt? Is she really hurt? And I, I also, yeah, I want to hear your take on that and what you think of Yanya recovering and how she did on the lead route. To me, that was like one of the most stressful moments, because when I saw her finger kind of get hurt and I was waiting for her to come out for lead. And then I also would argue, when I saw Yanya on lead somewhere around the middle of the route, I felt like she got a little stressed. She looked a little shook. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is Brooke's moment. And yeah, just
Oh, dude,
what did
yeah.
you think of Yanya? And because I got a hand to her, spoiler, of course, she did win. And I was impressed by Yanya. I was really impressed by Yanya. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, I will say right before I jump into some thoughts here, I missed that. I didn't see exactly Yanya hurting her finger. I didn't want. I was just trying to cram as much of this as possible in like a day. So you can explain your thoughts there more, and I'll just let you do that. But I will say, you said something very interesting where, collectively in this entire event, I saw the most stress out of these climbers than I've ever seen in any competition. Uh, Also specifically Serato, like, maybe I had some text back and forth with some of my friends about, like, man, it looked like Serato almost knew that it was close. And he almost never climbs like that. Like, that's something that I feel like he's kind of known for, is like being very calm and like controlled, and everything is a calculated decision. When he was slipping, when the boulder number 4 was slipping away from him, you could see him frantic. Like, you could see him real. And this is not a hit on him. It's just a hit on the fact that climbing competitions in the Olympics are probably that heavy. Like, it's probably that much impact of how important it is to get that medal. And it's like, if I don't do this, I have to catch up somewhere else. That's something that's super stressful as an athlete. And I think it's just impossible to be able to focus on those moments, given those stakes, given how much experience these people have. And in the future, it'd be super impressive. And that's more of what I saw in Yanya. If that happened and watching her on lead, it's like, dang, dude, how is she able to? The thing is that also what I saw is, during preview, they made a comment about her like tripping over the timer. She's just laughing like the whole time. Like, even her slipping on the slab after she like clearly is losing this, knowing she's got 4 minutes to try to do this extremely volatile boulder, she's just laughing. And I feel like that helps a ton to just be like, all right, like, there is a process to get me to do this boulder. There's a process to get me doing the best that I can perform to. I don't really have control over everything, so I'm just going to try my best. I think that's, a mindset that we all would like to have, but in reality, it doesn't happen that way when you feel, this impact, of the weight of the competition that you maybe have never felt before. And these medals are huge, man. That's maybe another big thing that I'm seeing on Instagram, like how many medals each country gets, how much. I didn't see this ever before, but like how much money people. It started to get really viral, like how much money countries give. Like, some countries give you like $250,000, $500,000 for getting medals, and plus some people in the Philippines, you get like houses and condos, man. Like, in America, you don't get nearly as much, but medals are still a huge deal. I mean, I think if you get a gold medal in the U.S., you're getting like 30K, and that's not a joke, and so. And it's also just representation for your whole country. I feel like that gravity for what you're actually climbing for, like, yeah, you're just climbing in that moment, but I think that's what I'm noticing a lot, is that gravity is hitting for all of these athletes. That's the biggest thing I noticed. But
I mean, I think if you win a gold medal, you make a lot more than 30K, even if that's all the
Right.
government gives you. I think it's a little bit more important than that.
Totally.
Yeah, I I I mean, you're right. It was the most intense, stressful, biggest competition climbing's ever had, I think. And I love that we saw those athletes get shook where Yanya Yanya, what they say, she she's won 45 World Cups. You hear it, the commentating, we can touch on the commentating here because the commentating be like world champion or something in this discipline. And it's like, well, they won a World Cup. I'm not saying they're not incredible climbers, but it's like three-time world champion. It's like, well, how many years are we talking about here? Because it seems like everyone's a freaking world champion. But then when they said Yanya, it's like 45-time World Cup. And so no wonder Yanya doesn't get shook when she goes and steps out on
Totally.
stage. And here she was. And yeah, she took it seriously. And just to give you the little blow by blow, she was of the drama of the finger injury potential. She was on the boulder number 4, women's boulder number 4 in finals, and she was on the start hold and she was swinging on it, and her finger got kind of stuck in there.
Oh, and that blocker.
Yeah, in that blocker.
Oh, I was
And she,
curious if it was, yeah,
yeah,
if it
so
was
she kind of
tight,
like takes it, you can see her kind of like, ooh, like, and
dude.
then kind of be bending it. And then she, you know, afterwards you can see her. It's, when people swear, but you can't hear the word, like you can just hear yell, fuck. And so she, you could see her like bending her finger, being all upset, kind of backstage. And so I just feel like that's a really heavy thing to have on your conscience, or I don't know what you want to call it, the just added pressure of not being able to trust your body when you step out onto the lead
Totally.
round. And the thing about a lead round I always think is tricky is like I'm watching Yanya climb and they are giving live updates. If I don't know, if you hit this hold, you're now third place. But you can even
Mm,
see like as she's moving, she's climbing the ranks. And something that is hard to realize is that if she falls just halfway down, she gets last. Like you have to like keep on going and do well. Like there's no room for error. And so when you have like a potential injury, there's what 70 moves worth of any slip means that you don't medal, and that's heavy, dude.
yeah,
I really gotta hand it to her. And sorry, I'll
yeah.
just to
No,
finish
no.
that injury thing is I did read an article. It seems like she's okay. It doesn't appear like she hurt her finger. She thought she maybe fractured it. I guess she had
Whoa.
fractured that same finger before years ago. But we're recording this just on Wednesday after the Olympics, so I don't have any extra information. But glad that she's not injured. But that added that was a drama
Yeah,
element there.
dude. I gotta say, again, I don't want to harp on the commentators too much, but that is the type of thing I want to be made aware of while the competition is happening. The gravity of like when things need to be happening and like what might happen if something happens where. I feel like that happens in other sports. Like they're so aware, as it is kind of a hit on the commentators. Like you got to really be aware of like exactly what's happening, like what's going on. Like I hear some things, and I'm not going to go into like exact details about certain things, but for me, it's just like actually kind of wrong. Like even like, I'm making one comment about this power boulder. It's like maybe use your terminology more specifically to what image you're trying to create for people who either know climbing or don't. And specifically in lead, like yeah, like why is it that this person? I think Petra did a really good job. This is like one place I think she did a really good job was on Brooks' attempt, and this is like the opposite of a lot of what I saw in the commentating or what I heard. On Brooks' attempt, she fell on the lead route because yeah, she down climbed back to like get into this clipping position, which by the way, some of the most difficult clipping positions I think I've seen in a lot of lead routes. There were a lot of
100%.
punishing moments where if you climbed too far past a section, it looked really hard to clip. And it almost looked like there were like not very many options to clip optimally at all. So you had to make a really difficult choice to make a suboptimal clip. And you had to be pretty fresh for it. Um, but yeah, I thought that was a pretty big
Yeah,
commentating thing that I wish I felt.
I mean, Petra, she has the pedigree when it comes to climbing, but I don't know. I would have liked a better commentator, but
Yeah.
they do what they can. Sorry, I
Yeah.
want to point out on Brooke and that clipping that basically she fell because she didn't clip there and kind of came back into the hold and kind of matched it and slipped. I I think Brooke could have won. Like
I know, dude. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that too. Just like how close that was.
When she fell, I mean, she looked pumped, but I don't like, it's really brutal to critique someone's thought process when they're pumped out of their gourd and tired, and she still got silver. But I just felt like she didn't make a good decision there, and knowing how good Brooke is, she could have made a better decision there.
Yeah,
Normally, maybe she was just tired. I was surprised that she fell the way she did. She actually looked relatively in control, and I was bummed for
yeah.
her.
And relative to other people who climbed past that, she looked just as fresh. Yeah, so I do want to make some comments on lead style setting. I was super psyched on lead, but before we move on to that, just so we could be done with it, stylistic setting for injury prevention, dude. We already made a comment on this about the Salt Lake World Cup. That's got to be done. Like I'm sick of seeing that. Like I'm sick of seeing that in bouldering competitions. Like seeing potential for like horrible injury. I know coordination needs to exist. I do know that, but there's a lot of ways to test it. There's a lot of ways to test it versus making like watching Brooke and Imori on boulder number 4 land on that first volume, like the boulder that Yanya hurt her finger on, landing on that volume being that much shorter is a lot of impact. And knowing you have to get that propelling distance. I don't know if you could tell, but like every time I landed on that thing, like there was so much shock going through her body. And like I just don't think you know that until you see it. But man, you got to really pay attention so you don't do that again in the future. Like they're gonna try as hard as they can, I think, in a given round. And you just want to account for what happens in a given body, like what happens when you're trying as hard as you can. There are certain things that you can't really account for, but that's a big one. It's a big one. And then the move right after that, where once you stick the 10 hold and then you're going to the finish, like you're propelling very, very, very far onto this landing platform and then going like one handed. And if you did happen to catch this, which very few girls were even getting any connection onto that finish hold, but if you do, and you pull on, you pull on it just a little bit and you fall, you're going face first from like 20 feet, and with a lot of sideways trajectory, there's just a lot of room for like fully torn ankles, like,
Didn't you
fully
see Yanya's
dislocated
fall?
shoulders.
Did you see Yanya's fall? It was pretty bad. Her last try on boulder number 4, she barely got the last hold, or she didn't. She grabbed it and peeled off, and she kind of like landed on her head and neck. I mean, not
Dude,
terribly, but dude, you know what that's like.
yeah, and the pads didn't seem like they were good for that. I saw even on boulder number 1 was like a very, very similar move. I hated watching the ending move for boulder number 1 for women's, where they're just jumping to this like two-handed thing. And luckily most of the girls just like absolutely pooped on that move. But like Chaehyun was the first girl to go out, and you see her like fully propelling herself over. And if she again happens to catch this thing a little bit too much, she's going face first into the ground sideways. And yeah, you're gonna have all this room for like tumbling and just like horrible things to happen. And if the pads are again set up appropriately for that, maybe it's okay. But these pads look really stiff. So again, just a lot of like really small things that I was like super not psyched on watching.
Okay,
Housekeeping things, right?
yeah. Oh, let's go back to lead and the women's lead. I just
Yeah,
want to hear your final thoughts there. I wanted
yeah.
to echo one of the injurious things I saw. I think it was on women's lead in semifinals. I don't know if you caught that, but at the very end, basically where everyone fell, it was kind of like you had an undercling and kind of like a deep drop knee to clip,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. Same
everyone was
thing.
like falling through that drop knee. Like you do
Yeah.
not want to get a drop knee and then fall like through, like deeper into the drop knee to fall off. Like that is
For whatever
sketchy. Didn't like it.
for whatever reason, the guys' semis route was exactly like that too. If you saw
Oh
that,
yeah, I
where
think
like
you're right.
they needed to
Yeah.
clip from that, and their knees are just going in. That's exactly how Jan-Luca Posch in the Salt Lake final that I'm talking about hurt his MCL. Like he actually hurt his MCL. These drop knees where they're super tight in pressure, there's like it could be a stylistic thing where you choose to do that because it's a good locked in position. But to know that that's probably the only position that high up on a super hard route where you're probably like way too pumped, because it's different when you're like feeling really fresh and you know that the drop knee's locker. Like that's a good position to usually clip from because you're locked. You're not like your plumb line set. You're stable, but it's a good way to be stable. But not when you're super pumped. And so yeah, just a lot of like little things that are housekeeping things that over the long course of time, over the next like 10, 20 years, setters should know not to do that kind of stuff. So just
Well,
some thoughts.
what did you think of the women's lead route
Yeah,
in general? And I also just like, my quick shout out is watching, God, I'm gonna butcher her name, Oriane Bertone. Is that how you say
Bertone,
her?
yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah, the
I've been
dry
watching her
fire.
for the past couple of years, and I really like watching her climb. I feel like she changed from
Yeah.
being like a kid to a grown up, and she didn't lose her style. Like sometimes I feel like
Yeah,
when kids are kids, they have a style and then they become grown-ups and maybe it didn't quite transfer. She still has a great style. And I was bummed to see her hand blow, just totally dry fire. That was
agreed.
kind of a finger bucket too. Like what she came off
Yeah,
of, I was surprised. And I thought she actually could have medal, or she looked strong.
yeah,
She looked really strong. So yeah, that
agreed.
was a bummer.
Yeah, 2 points there, and then I will get to my takes on lead. But yeah, two points there on Oriane. Her kind of debut into competing because she was so young, and like you do have to be a certain age to compete in World Cups, in Open. But like right off the gate, she was podiuming and making finals in bouldering World Cups, which is just really unheard of. And that kind of fell apart in the last couple of years. You didn't see her as often making podium spots or medal spots, but she still was making a lot of semis and finals. And to see her in the Olympic final was really cool. But also, yeah, I kind of wish she had more of a showing in the bouldering because I know she's capable of that. And
She's
then
a
in lead,
good
you're
boulderer.
watching, she's super good. And watching her in lead, like you could tell throughout the whole route, you could tell a lot of these, that's what I'm saying, you could tell the specialization. And you know she's not like fully specialized in lead, but man, watching her compared to a lot of the other lead athletes who just climbed, she was pretty fresh. Like she was a little bit tired. And I do want to clarify another harping of commentating. Petra said that wasn't, she didn't make any mistake when she had dry fired there. Disagreed. If you dry fire, there's a misusage of your tension. Like, yes, it just happened to be a massive, like, oh, that sucks so badly to dry fire. But usually, if you do dry fire, like what she could have done to not dry fire is overgrip that hold. Like she maybe could have saved that, which sucks because you shouldn't usually have to account for it. And to be efficient in climbing in lead, you don't want to have to overgrip those types of movements. But there was definitely a thing like where I watched Erin McNeese, that girl from the UK, who like seemingly like I've really like never heard her
Amazing.
name before too much.
Dude, I wanted to
Amazing,
shout her out. I'm glad you're shouting it because I was like,
yeah,
whoa, who is this?
dude.
She's incredible.
And her sticking that move, again, she tried so hard to put the tension in focal points for that movement. And Oriane was actually laying in that position. And so unfortunately, she kind of like if there was potential for her skin to dry fire, what I'm saying is that she put herself in the highest position to dry fire in that moment,
Mm.
which again is super unlikely, but like it's the most likely the way that she was operating that handhold and like how she was about to go for it. If she had engaged slightly on her hands or her shoulder, maybe she wouldn't have dry fired.
Well, I mean, I got to point out this is kind of what makes a lead climber a good lead climber is being
Yeah,
able to ride that line of using just the right amount of energy. And yes,
yeah,
it's like risky. I mean, Almondra does a good job of explaining how you have to climb risky and what that means. And part of that
right.
is being kind of a little loose. Like, of course, I mean, she can own that hold. She could have owned that
Yeah,
hold and it was a mistake, but that kind of goes to show her specialization is in bouldering and
totally.
she struggled with that line. Although
Yeah.
I'm just bummed. I wanted to see her. And
Yeah,
also
yeah.
I hated how many times they're like, oh, like that was, they moved perfectly. Or and you're just, I'm like
Yeah,
watching,
dude,
I'm like,
no.
what makes
Stop.
you think that was perfect? Not even that like, uh, they had no errors. Just like, how do you
Yeah.
know what was perfect for that sequence and that body? And anyways,
Yeah.
just a little pet
I
peeve.
just
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. I agree so much. I wish there's a lot of specific language that can be used in climbing. And if like I'd rather just not hear anything, right? Like if you're not going to choose very specific words for what you're saying, I'd rather
Okay.
hear nothing and just be like, "Oh, that was really cool." Like, like I thought that was really impressive or something like that actually would be fine for me. But okay.
But
So lead and this
Tim, they're just hype men or hype women. They're like, it doesn't even matter. They're just like, yeah, wow,
sure.
like cool. Like there's no, I don't know. Anyways, I don't want
Yeah.
to get stuck. This is like the
Yeah,
least
yeah.
interesting part of the climbing is talking about people talking about the climbing. We're already doing that. We don't need to talk about other
Totally
people
right.
talking about climbing. Okay,
You're
sorry.
totally right. You're
Go
totally
on,
right.
go on.
Just a hater. So this actually kind of goes into what I saw in lead is this is something that I've competed only in lead World Cups. I've actually never competed in a bouldering World Cup, and I've competed in a couple of lead events. And sometimes there's lead events in the style where it's like it feels like a bouldering climb. And sometimes that's not really what you want when you're fully specialized in lead or you're really training for it. Because my understanding of lead is using mostly a climbing IQ and endurance aspect to climb efficiently, use power when necessary to climb one attempt, your first attempt and only attempt on this lead route, the best way that you can, and to fire in those moments the most that you need and to have perfect control. You're showcasing of climbing. And style is super important. For example, if you had a bunch of like coordination moves on lead, you wouldn't really want to see that because then you see spikes in the ability to showcase your climbing IQ and climbing talent because we already know that coordination is kind of dependent on you doing it perfectly on that one attempt. And lead climbing is a lot less about that. And what I saw in the setting was a lot of opportunity for twists and turns and shakeouts and a lot of choices that were made, sometimes to hurt the climber, like we were talking about in Brook, but honestly, lots of moments where right before Brook fell, there was that section where you have this pink pinch, you cross into this like Gaston pink pinch, and you have all these, like with those volumes there and with the types of holds that you saw there. Also, you don't often see in lead climbing competitions hand holds. Like you actually do see lots of features and like, big fiberglass and like as you saw a lot less of that. You saw in very specific locations, but and this is just for me, I really hope that lead climbing keeps going in that direction because if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna use in a combined format, like two very opposing styles in bouldering and lead, which for me makes it okay, and that's a discussion we should have. Is like maybe what justifies bouldering to be so in that style is because you have lead, and so because we had that, I really appreciated seeing lead be like it looked like a really beautiful amount of sequences as like a spray on an actual lead route. And what I mean by that is like when you're spray wall climbing, it's a lot of like more fundamental climbing movements, like a lot more drop knees and like you just see so much like toe hook, usage and like, twisting, turning, lock offs, like getting really deep in the wall. Like the dimension of the climbing was available to them and a lot of them used it. And sometimes a lot of them didn't. And that's where I saw the difference in proficiency in lead language. It's really where you see it. Like Aimori specifically in Chaehyun, like where they're clipping from, how quickly they're able to clip, how much they're turning in, and like how fast they're moving in certain sections, where they're slowing down. I think that was just showcased so beautifully, and that was dependent on the setting, in my opinion.
Uh, I do think the clipping was, for some reason, clipping was really hard. Even the actual quick draws seemed to be hard to clip. And I watched
Yeah,
Adam climbing, and Adam still crushed clipping. And I thought that was, I was like, that guy's clips and bolts. I so okay. I'm what I'm hearing is you thought the lead routes were good, man, and it makes me feel good on my side too because I thought that they were really cool. They looked really fun to me. They looked like something I could climb. I don't know if I could actually climb them difficulty wise, but they looked like climbs that just had handholds and reminded me of what normal climbing is. And I love that you pointed out that if they're going to do a combined thing, having bouldering be more of this jumpy, dynamic parkour, whether you think that's good or bad, just different, testing different things. And what I loved about the lead routes was how different the beta was that everyone used and different places to rest, different
totally.
places to clip. I thought it was incredible. And this is an impossible question for you, but I'm going to ask you anyways. How hard do you think the women's final was and how hard do you think the men's final was?
Um, man, I gotta be honest. I watched way more of the lead in from the women's, so I'll have maybe a stronger opinion there. But to me, it looked like 514 for sure for both. Looked like 14B, maybe a little harder. Like specifically, the
Wow,
top
for
ramped up
women's, you thought
quite a
it
bit.
was
Yeah, yeah, for
14B.
sure.
Holy
Yeah,
shit.
well, like it also ramped. Like you didn't see anybody fall below halfway, so you already know like to get to halfway. But also look at how pumped and tired they look to get about halfway. So to me, it looked like let's just say where like Orion fell right before that kind of pinch sequence, where most of them got right above that. That to me looked like 13 plus, so like CD. So you already know just to get to like 60 points is like roughly 13 plus CD probably. Like it's certainly they're not getting that tired on 13B. It actually could be harder. Like you don't know. There's so much. I'm just indicating based on, yeah, what I know about sequences. It's a pretty long route. There's quite a few movements. It's snaked a lot. It's not just like probably what about a 60-foot tall wall. It's not a 60-foot long route. It's a lot longer than that because it snakes so much, and it literally in some parts like down climbed and goes back up. Yeah, my guess is that it's like a very hard 14B to actually send the thing, but maybe the route feels more like 14. Maybe it's 14C to send it just because that very last move looks so hard. And literally, you can get a grade for one movement, I think, in lead. I think a lot of people would have different opinions there, but I think to send the route probably be like 14BC, maybe right in between there. But maybe it feels closer to like low end 14B until you get to the last like 10 movements. Yeah, that's my feeling. And the men's route had to be like 14 plus. It always has to be 14 plus. These guys are shockingly good at on-sighting by 14 plus.
I mean, now that you point out how many moves there are and how consistent it is, probably 25 plus meters like of actual climbing, and that last move being super super hard. It was cool how well it turned up. We saw people fall at really different spots, which means that
Yeah.
it did get consistently harder each move. Although I gotta tell you, you said something around, I know you're just totally guessing here, like where Orion fell was maybe like mid 513. And I just remember as I'm watching Yanya and I'm kind of cheering on Brooke, even though I kind of wanted, I don't know, it doesn't matter. I wanted whatever outcome was going to be, but sometimes it's fun to kind of root for the underdog anyways. And I said, I thought I saw Yanya get a little flustered kind of earlier on that kind of just, she didn't know where to cut. And like, she just was kind of moving her heels around. She just didn't look like she was climbing calmly and confidently. When I saw her get to those kind of middle of the red section, I was like, oh, she's going to win, because I was just looking at the holds after it and looking at the positions, and there was no risk there. It was just, can you climb this or not? And those holds, she
Yeah.
just latched on. It was just, I was like, oh, she's going to do it. And sure enough,
Yeah.
she was able to just go, just robot it.
I don't know about you, but on that point, I like that. I like watching a climbing competition and like knowing who's going to win to a certain degree. I like some level of volatility, of course, where it's like, oh no, but you messed up. Like you should get that cost. Like Brooke falling on that section is like, okay, that's like a justified early fall because we both agree that she should have gone a little bit further. But when you watch most other sports in the Olympics, it also looks like that. It also looks like even in running, you're like, oh, I know who's winning from like pretty much the first turn in like some of these longer things, or like in swimming, like the person who's leading the swim generally wins the entire race. And so kind of what I'm getting to is like, okay, so you can understand the level of performance that a person is capable of. Before in something like climbing too, I would like to see some more consistency in certain places. Like there's already so much volatility in just the nature of what we do and the constraints of the game. So I really, really, really appreciate watching lead and like Aimori. And I was just hoping for it, man. Like watching Aimori pull on, I was like, I hope this girl shows the world what she's actually capable of and does this thing, because she is probably one of the best, if not in that day, the best lead climber out there. And yeah, just to see her like take that was so sick.
All right. First of all, Tim, you got to not make analogies to running and swimming, because you have no idea what you're talking about. And I can think of all sorts of examples in the Olympics where that did not happen. So you got to just keep in climbing so that people don't just rip us a new
You're
one.
right. You're right.
Um, okay. There's two ways we could go right here that, and I'll let you go wherever you want. It would be interesting to talk about Aimori and her stature, her abilities, whether it was fair or not, and talk about the bouldering round. Or I thought it's also interesting to point out, when we're talking about lead route design and setting, how in the semis there is this move that
Mm.
Tamoa slipped on. There was a foot slip. There was a movement outright where
Jesse.
Jesse slipped. Oh, dude, hold on, really quick. Shout out to previous guests of the pod. Jesse Grouper competed, did amazing, represented us really well. Good job, Jesse. I wonder, I didn't text him afterwards. I wonder how his finger ended up. The guy, had
Mm.
that finger injury, and just, I don't know, like, I think that the last thing, as people who are all struggling through injuries, which is just every climber, probably every athlete, like, it must be rough training and then going to a high pressure event and then having in the back of your head, like, how is this going to affect me? And you can say all day about how, oh, you're just going to put it aside and try your best. But let's be honest, like, that's easier said than done, no matter how good a competitor you are. So good job,
Yeah.
Jesse. You guys can tune in and listen to the episode we did with him before the Olympics to kind of hear some of his training, some of his insane volume of training. And then
Yeah.
also wanted to shout out Al Ranhil. Did I say that right? What do you think? Was that pretty
I think
good?
so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You can hear him, Al, pronounce it better on maybe our first, like one of our first guests ever, and he was one of the coaches at the Olympics. And good job, Al. So yeah,
Yeah.
just wanted to shout those guys. Now I'm like lost. I don't remember what we were talking about. Oh
No,
yeah,
yeah. You want to talk about eye or foot section on lead?
yeah.
Yeah, I
What do you
got
want to
you.
talk about?
Before that, I do want to continue some shout outs as well. Yeah, shout out Jesse. That's awesome. Yeah, obviously, I wish he was able to showcase more, and I'm sure he wishes as well. I think his injury was going pretty well, at least leading up to the event. Al, I've rooted for Al to be a higher level, higher involved coach in USA climbing for so long at this point. I'm super happy that he was able to get that opportunity and to be there. I'm sure it was super helpful for the athletes as well. But another shout out to Natalia. I didn't know this until she had just posted on Instagram, but she was dealing with an injury very close to the Olympics. And yeah, just to like touch on, granted that that's not the reason that she didn't make the finals. I don't know. I don't want to have too strong of an opinion there, and it's definitely upsetting because we are all know as a climbing community that she's probably one of the highest level female competitive athletes. So we know that she deserves that spot and she should be up there, and it's a bummer, but she's probably going to be there again, to be honest. And she was dealing with an injury, which just like yeah, just to touch on your point there, it's mentally super difficult to be in between competitions, especially once you've already qualified for something and you know you have to be in high level performance mode. That's just a lot of pressure, and you don't want to live like that all the time.
Tim, good job on shouting out all those people. And you talked about Natalia, and I want to use this to ask you slash hear you expound upon this fact that people like Natalia, Natalia Grossman, is arguably the top woman out there next to Yanya, and she vies with like, and with Brooke. Like, if you're talking about the greatest female competitors right now, Natalia is definitely someone that you bring up, and she didn't make finals. And I was also thinking of Magos not making finals, who you got to
Yeah,
bring. I mean, maybe you don't want to say it in competition climbing that he's one of the greatest ever, but Jesus, that guy, an incredible climber. And maybe just touching on what it's like to compete and what it's like to try to make finals and the volatility there, and just like, why is Natalia not in the finals? Why was Tomoa not in the finals? And even though she was dealing with the injury, like you're saying, I don't know. I don't know if that's really the reason, you know?
yeah. Yeah, this podcast could be so long. I have so many thoughts. Like even just to touch really quickly, like watching Tomoa watch the finals and watching him watch Serato, I had a feeling. I think I told you this. Like I had a feeling that Tomoa would have smashed that bouldering round in the final. I actually think he would have won that finals round in the bouldering. So it's like, yeah, you're right. Why are these insanely talented athletes not in consistently every round? But that's what we were touching on earlier. It's not to say that, like, okay, so that's why I said I don't want to specifically call out why Natalia didn't make it past because I actually just feel bad for her. Like I think she should have. I think she owns that. It's odd for sure in lots of ways, but really what the point there is that that's how important it is to have setting in a specific way to somehow guarantee to a certain degree that your most talented athletes make it through. And you do have to do a good job as game makers in entirety, as a community, to say what makes climbers talented. Like I just don't think they fully understand that. It's something we were talking about earlier. Like if they really understood, yeah, what is climbing? Okay, what are the best climbers? What do they have? Like, okay, so we already know that Aimori is severely missing, I would call fundamentals in powerful climbing. We could say that she's not that much shorter than the next shortest competitor. We already know that. She is, it's just going to be my statement here. She is just very far behind in specific styles. But the point there is how often are we going to see that style worth that many points? That's what's really an issue. Is that's why I was kind of harping on the style that we saw on women's boulder number 4, women's boulder number 2, the slab in finals, where like Yanya could have very easily had a similar thing as Natalia. And yeah, even on lead, if there was a moment to be able to slip on the bottom of the lead route in the women's final, don't you think it's very possible that Yanya is not having a single medal? Yeah, it's super possible. Did it not happen that way? Yeah, and that's super good. But I just wish that there was more care in like, yeah, what if these, you know, quote unquote unlikely events happen? Then you have someone like Tomoa not making it. And so yeah, I could touch on both eyes thing and the foot thing on the men's semifinal lead.
Let's talk about I Maury, because I feel like when we're texting or talking about this, I usually like push back on you, and I'm like, no, like I is just deficient in basic dynamic catching. But and you're saying no, but Josh, like how much should she be
Yes.
penalized for that? You're like, I agree, but how much should she be penalized? And so just to like make this extreme and kind of like side with you, is that bouldering, people just look and they say like bouldering is a discipline, lead climbing is a discipline, or sport climb, whatever the heck they call it now. And it's like they're getting 100 points each. But if you rewound like 20 years ago or more, like I remember competing and sometimes there would be a combined competition, and there'd be boulders and ropes, and the boulders would not be worth as much as the rope climbing, because in
Hmm.
our heads, in the sport at that point, rope climbing was what real climbing was, whatever the heck that means. And so my point is that you could just imagine Olympics where they said, okay, we're combining it. Yeah, bouldering, we don't love it, but bouldering's part of it. Lead climbing is worth 150 points. Bouldering's worth 50. And then what did
Oh,
the medals
interesting.
look like?
So interesting.
And so I just want to like highlight what you're saying and make sure it's really clear for people that you understand where Mori is lacking. You're not saying she's not lacking something. You're just posing the question, how do we decide which attributes to emphasize and
Yeah.
give points to versus others?
Exactly. And I'm also not here to say that they should be exactly highlighting very specific attributes. I also don't know that. I have strong feelings, and you guys know that if you listen to the podcast, I do have strong feelings about what are climbing fundamentals, what are things that lead to mastery in climbing. And I do want to talk about that. Alex Megos is an interesting part of the conversation because if you watched him in anything but climbing competitions, you would probably not argue that he is one of the climbing masters in general in rock climbing. So why isn't he in a final in the Olympics for rock climbing? It's not just that he couldn't perform in that moment. In fact, he looks like he's always on top of his performance game. Like he looks like that, but maybe his style, the style that maybe we understand as, you know what I'm saying? That's what the discussion is so interesting about. So I'm really glad that you brought up also like older climbing form and like the thought, and also something to point out. There was a point in time, like within the last 10 years, where there was a lot of discussion about why is climbing so boring? Like, why is climbing so slow? Like, why is it in climbing competitions that it's so slow? And just to make a point here that just because we're turning 180, or we just happen to turn 180 from a statement like that, that's my understanding. So we're going to go under this discussion with that context, saying my understanding is that at a certain point throughout, I've been competing for like the last 11 years straight, and climbing competitions have changed almost every single year I have competed, but it's changed towards where we are in the Olympics today. And it was very, very different. It was like kind of the moment I started competing was like the end of that era that you're talking about, Josh. And I want to, before I answer from like the specific position of Mori, I actually want to point out more some of the athletes that I think were also missing heavy fundamentals in rock climbing that happened to get like 60 points in bouldering. Right. And so again, I'm not going to just name names there, but if you want to watch the Olympics and you know what I'm talking about, like, okay, let's just paint this picture here. In order for Mori to even start boulder number 1 in the women's bouldering final, she actually had no choice but to launch off this volume. The only point I'm making here, there's a lot of points I could make here, but the only point I'm making here is that she had no choice. She was too short to jump straight to these 2 start holds. So why make it an even possible option for other girls to be able to do that? If you're going to, and just unarguably, it's way easier to do that move that way. That's just unarguable. It's way easier just to jump. Like you're jumping towards this volume that is almost completely vertical. You're trying to gain something off of it, which is a complete parkour move. In parkour, you do that. You just try to jump straight up walls, right? By using the idea of friction. But if you have to jump backwards and you're catching this hold where one's a sloper and one's a pretty bad crimp, it just seems super hard. And again, it's not to say that she couldn't do it, but it's it's on the confines of a 4-minute round. She could have done it probably, but how much more are you asking her to do to earn 5 points? Where these girls, because you started that boulder, and dude, another just wild take here. I thought that boulder was way too easy to be an Olympic round, like way too easy. Once you stuck that move, like other than Chaehyun, like almost everybody certainly did that boulder. So again, what is it costing Mori to have to do this really ridiculous jump to the start? Okay, I just want to make that point before I kind of said another thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on, dog. I gotta get my 2 cents
I'm
in there.
holding on.
So what I hear from there that is frustrating to me is that there's no other options. And
Yeah.
I think that's what we see in lead. That was why I thought the lead routes were so good, is that there was a million options. Now, sure, you had to grab the left hand hold with your left hand, the right hand hold with your right hand, but there was 5 different foot positions. There's hand foot healing. There's a million ways to do it. And in the boulders, especially on that specific move, it was just, can you jump and latch? But then to play devil's advocate to myself, you said she's short, but she's not that short. And I just want to be clear, just to put metrics on it. She's 5'1", Brooke is 5'2". That is just not enough of a difference to. And Brooke is on the shorter side. I is on the shorter side, but she's not 4'6", man. Right? Like
Yeah.
she's not. And I also, my thing on that was, I think that it wasn't just her jumping ability. She couldn't latch, man. Like,
Hmm.
and that's like a classic lead climber thing versus boulder, kind of like contact strength versus, once they, you always know that style. And she's totally that style. They settle into that hold and they fucking
Yeah.
got it. They got it on lock. But then snatching it from that jump, that's like a whole nother skill. And so I don't know. I
Okay. So
just, yeah,
to
go
jump
ahead.
to jump in because there's two kind of interesting thoughts that I have about her abilities. So before that, again, to answer your devil's advocate, it's not necessarily to say that it was that she couldn't do it. She probably could have, but how much does it cost her? That's really the argument here. It's not that could she do it or not. I've heard way too many Instagram BS things to say like, oh yeah, it's height. It's like, no, I'm not talking about height. It's what does it cost her to be behind in that skill? Because there's I would have the same argument. Not that many people know too much depth about lead and nuance and lead, but if you do know the nuance and lead, there's a lot of behind skills that you're seeing in these girls who can just shoot past 13 mid. A lot of these girls can climb 13 mid, but they're not punished for it for not being able to output at 514 level. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
It's
okay.
yeah,
Hold on. So here's the thing: is you acknowledge that she is potentially deficient in some basic climbing skills there, and we'll say the ability to do some kind of run and jump off the mats, and I'll also put in dynamic catching ability. And you're saying that, but it's how much is she punished, right? Because not
yeah,
only is she just punished those 5 points, dude, she's punished 25 points. Because what if it wasn't, but
yes,
what if it had been her style after that, right?
yes,
But
yeah,
so the thing is that what that skill of running and jumping or latching, like, what if that, and I don't know, like, we can't put numbers on this. We're just making shit up anyways, because it's just a skill that is arbitrary that we're pulling out. What if that's like a V4 skill? And it's like, wait, but she's short. Okay, what if that
yeah,
meant it needed her to be a V6 at that? And like Brooke,
yeah,
Brooke had a little bit of trouble, but let's
yeah,
face it, like Brooke can latch, right? Like,
yeah.
and so
So
like
okay,
maybe Brooke had to be a V8 at it or whatever. But like, isn't that a reasonable expectation for, like maybe she should be punished because it's such a low level of
yeah.
requirement? She should be punished for it.
So that's what's kind of interesting is that maybe it could be a reasonable expectation to have these climbers. Okay, you're not even at that minimum level. Like, okay, maybe you should be punished 25 points, but she was punished 50 actually. She was punished like damn near 50 points because boulder number 4, like we said, this is the double mistake here is that okay, I could deal as a spectator and someone who really respects this sport, really loves it, really respects these athletes. I could deal with watching boulder number 1. Like I actually could. I did. I watched it like from start to finish for most of it. Like I said, I didn't see some aspects because writing notes the whole time. I watched it and I was like, all right, all right, all right. Like yeah, can't jump on this volume. Yeah, it's also to be fair, it could be a V4 move if you're 5'6". Like if you're 5'9", it could be a V4 move. But as you get shorter, it does get exponentially more difficult. But let's just say it's V8. Okay, she also should probably be able to do a V8 jump at the Olympics. Well, I also want to make the second point I was going to make earlier is that it's not that she's seemingly bad at latch movements because I've seen her do ridiculously hard latch movements on lead. It just seems that if you combine the two, and this is anyone who's a rock climber can feel this too, you start combining two things you're bad at, you get really bad at the second one, like in motion. So I don't think she's bad at latching actually. I think she's bad at latching when it comes to combining those two motions at once, which is also something that's not reasonable. You can expect that, and that's why you have to be really careful as a route setter. What are you testing and why, and when are you doing it? Because that's another point that you make that I think is really important for boulders is that you don't just have one boulder showcase one redundant, one skill is, and every other skill is redundant on a boulder. I would like to see a plethora of skills on the same boulder. And I don't really like it. You're essentially saying that because you have 4 boulders and the 4 boulders are different styles of the Olympics, which they also weren't, that there's only 4 styles in bouldering. No, we already know that there's a million techniques and styles in climbing in general. So I would just like to see it. I don't expect to see all of them across 4 boulders, but I would like to see a boulder test many different aspects. So that boulder to me was redundant. It was just, there was a lot of mistakes with it. And then seeing 2 of those boulders in the same round was also redundant. So yeah, that's just answer a couple of points there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I get it. No, I see what you're saying, and I don't totally disagree. And it is funny because it's tempting to call her not powerful and not strong, but then the number three, the power boulder, which I don't know. I don't want to get into descriptions there, but
Right.
clearly she actually is
Dude.
physically very strong. Like I just mean like just you gotta look at
Yeah.
the movement on there. And number three was powerful. I don't know if it's like the same as that first boulder where you're like yarding and swinging and really grilling. But
Yeah.
it was kind of like a more classic power tech burl kind of block. And so she is physically strong. And the way she did that was in a way that was uniquely her own, and everyone kind of solved it. Well, her, Brooke, and Yanya kind of solved it differently, and that was fun, right? Like that's the thing. I
Yeah.
feel like that's what we're both saying, and I'm trying to make a case for why. I mean, I can see it both ways, and this is why, dude. Setting is everything. It's so
Yeah. Yeah.
important. It's and yeah, so that's why we can
That's
just
really
pick
the
on it for
point.
hours. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really the point here, right?
Uh,
Um,
can
I want
we?
to,
Okay, go ahead. And
yeah.
then let's go to men's because I feel like the men
Yeah. Yeah.
climb too. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's something that's kind of interesting is like for whatever reason, and maybe just to like make a point there, like I was overall pretty satisfied with the men's climbing, like, and it's because so we're not talking about them because it was a bad competition. In fact, it to me it was drama filled. There was high quality setting, in my opinion. There was a degree of like in many different cases, like you really needed to pull everything out of the bag to do any of the men's boulders or to get any height on the men's lead routes. And so, why is that happening? That's a really hard discussion to have. We're talking about why it's not happening in the women's, but why it's happening in the men's, man, it's a lot of different reasons. The level is just seemingly like pretty, like level across the entire finals, or maybe even the entire semifinal, which is maybe again a reason why Megos isn't making it to the final because just flat out there's a lot of it's not just style in the men's, it's just that the level is like seemingly quite a bit higher across all the fundamentals that we understand in climbing. Like they're all cracked, dude. They're all insane in climbing in all of the styles in the men's. So it's just for me a really balanced, fun competition, to be honest.
I I enjoyed the women's more and I watched it
Mm.
second because it came on after. But when I watched the men's, I was losing my shit and texting everyone saying, "This is so good, you gotta watch it." But then the women's overshadowed it for me for
Mm.
no real reason other than it was just really good too. And I I really, dude, we should also shout out to Colin Duffy just because we're
Oh
Americans. You
yeah.
probably and you've competed with him a bunch. I
Uh,
remember that bouldering, the bouldering masters. Wait, no, the TBF, the Boulder Field Masters competition that you did with him where he won. I feel like, and I think you got second. I feel like that was when I was like, oh, dude, Colin is really coming to his own now. Like he is special. And I was surprised he didn't medal. He looked good. He looked
oh
strong, and he must be bummed. I mean, he shouldn't be bummed. He got fourth in the Olympics, but he had what it took to be the best. And when he did
yeah,
stick that final hold on boulder number four,
dude.
dude, I loved his emotion. He's out there, dude. He's trying
He's
hard, and
yeah,
I loved it. So, dude, just shout out to Colin for hanging out there and doing really well. He just got beat by better climbers that day, and it was because it's freaking
yeah.
Toby Serato and Jakob Schubert. Like, those are good climbers, man. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you said it. You said it perfectly. So I'm not going to reiterate too much. But yeah, I sent him a message. I was super proud of him, just like representing, and he's just been like a dog for so long. He's been doing it that way for so long, and like he's had his moments, man. He's had a lot of good moments. But honestly, I think his career is just getting started, and I think he's going to represent American comp climbing for for years and years to come. He's only just seemingly getting better and stronger in all of the aspects that we're talking about. Like that's something that's really impressive about Colin is that he's not just deciding like, I may be overgeneralizing here about like someone like Alex Megos or even like Adam Andra. Those guys seem to care a lot more about climbing outside than they do about just the competitions. Colin seems to care about climbing the best that he can do, no matter what it is. And it's not a hit to those other guys. It's just like that's a huge praise to him. He's doing it all of the time. And again, the girls aren't really doing that. And this is going to jump to the next point. I'm going to name drop here a little bit, but watching the women's competition really made me miss watching Alex Puccio, Margot Hayes, Ashima, Michaela Kirsch, Mina Markovic, Jane Kim, Akio Noguchi, Anna Storr. Anaka Verhoeven, Shauna Coxey, Megan Mascarenas. There's just so many
That's
names
all
that
the
I
names. You
just,
dropped all the names. There's no other names, dude. Those are all
dude,
of
like,
them.
I, I hope this is circling a point that I've been trying to make this whole time where, like, I don't think the level of female rock climbers is just like that much lower than the men's collectively. Like, we've already proven that I think in climbing in general seems to be a fully gender, just like fair sport. Like, girls can climb hard, man. Like Katie Lamb, like, come on. There's a lot of girls out there who can climb, just climb, lead or boulder, competition or outside. There are girls who can climb super, super hard. But why am I watching this, competition? And so this is kind of for me what's I think the reason why my mind went there is because you asked a question, where is our sport going? And that's where our sport is going. It just what's being proven through the last decade or so of competition evolution, and maybe the lack of care in certain aspects of taking care of climbing evolution in the competition realm. That's where I feel like it's going. It's going away from some of these climbers are still some of these climbers are just like phasing out because they're getting older and retiring from climbing hard. But some of those climbers are extremely relevant still today. There's a lot of male climbers out there who are extremely impressive climbing athletes who are probably never going to compete. I actually just texted Noah Wheeler, who had just won this. I think it was one of the combine events in. He beat Drew. Like, dude, I was so psyched. Not because he just beat Drew. I love Drew. But beating Drew is really hard. Like anywhere at any given time. And I texted him and I said, Do you plan on ever competing, especially if the format or style changes?" And he was like, "Yeah, like if it changed." And I was like, "See, that's the stuff that I'm really interested in." Is I think the reason why I asked him that is because I actually think Noah is one of the best rock climbers out there. Period. Aiden Roberts, like, where's that guy? He's never. I don't see him compete. That's for me what's super. I grapple super strongly with this. Whether we're podcasting or not, whether I have a conversation over text with you or not, Josh. If I see a competition, I'm really challenged inside because I'm like, I think I know what personally. I think I know what like hard climbing is like. I think I understand a lot of like a lot of fundamentals and like maybe what mastery in climbing looks like. I tried to chase it for a really long time, and I'm gonna try to chase it for the next decade of my life probably. And why is there such a level disparity at the competitions themselves? That's not necessarily just a hit to the level that I'm seeing. That might be more of a hit to what is the issue with the constraints of the game that we have, the setting style, or like the lack of my accusation at the lack of care and the filter of like what these setters need to be putting on the wall to really showcase that over time. And just many times that I've seen some of these athletes compete and then not make a round. It's like, what? Like, why did that happen? And yeah, that could happen for a lot of different reasons, but for me, it's an issue. And yeah.
Are you saying that you want to add a discipline of board climbing to the Olympics, and we should just give gold to
That is
Noah now? It would
exactly.
just be Noah and Magos just battling. Maybe Zach Gala out there too, just complete board champs.
Dude.
Uh,
Yeah.
this is you when you were name dropping. You said Akio, and I just want to know. This is just total tangent. I thought I heard them say Tomoa and Akio are married. Is that true?
Yeah.
Did
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
They've been
my
married
god.
for a little bit, I think. Yeah.
Is Serato their baby? Is that is, did they create
That would
Serato?
be,
Because that would make sense. That would
that would
explain
make sense,
everything. Yeah.
but that would be highly unlikely just based on their ages.
Ah, okay. That's sweet that they're married. Okay,
Yeah.
Tim, I still want to ask you about men's bouldering because or at least or men's lead. I want to go a little bit deeper into the men's, even though you were just happy with it. Um, I I thought that the men's number 3, that the power boulder again, I thought that was the best boulder. I thought that was an incredible boulder.
So cool.
I also want to shout out Hamish MacArthur, I think is his name.
Oh, yeah.
I don't pay as much attention to World Cups as others, so maybe he should have been on my radar. I thought he climbed incredibly well, and watching him, he came out early in a lot of the boulders and the lead. And sometimes like when it's the first person out, you think, oh, they're not going to be so great. He was like setting the bar, and I remember him on boulder number 3 put up an incredible fight. And boulder number 3, just I freaking loved it. So yeah, any thoughts on bouldering / lead other than just it was pretty good?
Oh yeah. Yeah, first and foremost, Hamish, yeah, he's a decently good friend. I really like Hamish, and yeah, every time I see him, it's just like always good to have a chat and climb together. But I had texted you, I think, before the Olympics. Just we were just chatting about random stuff, and I think I mentioned some possible guests that you could have in the future. And I remember mentioning Hamish, and you're like, "Oh, I don't know who that guy is," and I was like, "Well, you should," and
Now I
you know,
do. Oh, damn. Okay.
thank God he had just an amazing, I would call it a high level climbing competition debut because Hamish, honestly, before the last like year, he didn't have like a bunch of like amazing results, and even making it to the Olympics for him was like kind of a surprise. Again, not to hit on his climbing ability, but competing is a totally different beast. But yeah, to show up at the Olympics and just like first of all make the final, and I texted him right after he made the final. I was like, holy, like dude, so sick to just like be in that final. But his quality of fight, I do want to touch on that just a little bit. I think competing is, we've talked about this on podcasts in general, like yeah, what's the best way to perform at a climbing event? Like you have to be able to distill to, like your climbing IQ has to be insanely vast. You have to understand maybe what are likely things that might happen, like your climbing logic has to be really good because you only have 4 minutes, and it's also physical, right? So it's like it zaps everything out of you to try something in a climbing competition, so you do have to like be really like keen on what's good to try to do, and then you have to be fully present to make sure that happens every time. Well, we already kind of discussed even at the highest level. So I think looking at like Serato and Toby and Jakob, they are more experienced than someone like Hamish, and they're honestly just the climbing ability is like so high. And so to see Hamish in score wise really close to them is like, okay, so we discussed that Serato and them looked like they were really fighting for Olympic medals. Like that, it looked like more they were fighting for Olympic medals and fighting for the rock climbs in front of them. But it looked like to me that Hamish was doing his best to just climb the rock climb in front of him to the best ability. And that's something that I didn't see across the entire board, women's or men's, as much as I saw in Hamish. And so just to see, and also that's could be a compliment to the setting that I saw in the men's as well. Again, that's a complaint that I saw in the women's, is that I didn't see enough of that in the bouldering. Like I wish I saw more opportunity for someone like who I think is just a beast. I think every time she sees a climb in front of her, unless it's specifically in those things that she's not so good at, she's trying really hard to do the best that she can do. Well, in the men's though, it's like if you tried, it looked like you had the ability to. You know, the slab looks so difficult, and specifically men's boulder three. Like Hamish got to that last, I'm pretty sure on his first or second try, he got to that last section. But what it looked like it required for you to get there was like a crazy mixture of just absolute raw strength, different types of strength, which is sick. Like just what you needed to do,
That
sick as shoulder
press,
move,
dude. I
the
love that
press,
press.
like,
Yeah.
oh, dude, the setting. That was my favorite boulder. That was my favorite boulder I've ever seen in competition. I can just say that right now. My favorite boulder I've ever seen in competition. And he almost did it. Like if he had, I think if he had done a slightly different sequence to go to that underclaim before the finish move, like if he just done it Toby's way, I think he would have done it, which is just so sick. Like, yeah,
I
so
just
lots of thoughts, of
I just
course.
got to point out that you just called Imori a beast, and like it made me think that that should be her nickname. You know, when there's someone who's maybe like 6'8" and 300 pounds and they call him tiny, like Imori, like the beast, and
She should be the
she should
beast.
be the beast. Yeah, that was also my favorite boulder. Also looked just like the hardest, and
Dude, so hard.
I gotta give props to Toby and Serato
Yeah.
for how they did it. Like, I mean, uh, Toby especially actually crushed that boulder. Serato had his moments. He looked a little, like you're saying, he looked a little shook. He just wasn't that
Yeah.
calm, like smooth decision making, committing and making it work because of that commitment. Where it's that thing that they make look he makes look so easy, where he just commits and you're like, oh, of course it's like that. Oh, of course the move goes like that. But you have no idea that that just takes total commitment and amazing body positioning to understand that he could commit and make it look that easy. What did you think about Toby winning? Like when you were thinking about who you thought might medal, was Toby a surprise for you?
No. I mean, I think for sure I thought Toby was going to medal. I would have been shocked if Toby didn't medal. But just seeing Serato won every other round up until literally the final bouldering round. Did he win the lead round? He,
I don't remember, but if he didn't, he was darn close, and he was so good in bouldering that it just like didn't
yeah.
matter. Yeah.
Just see. Actually, I think he won the bouldering round. I think he won the bouldering round, and Colin was in second in bouldering. He
Oh,
won
I thought you
three.
meant in semi. Yeah, you're talking about in semis,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well,
Okay.
all four of the rounds, bouldering in lead in semis and bouldering and lead in finals. But in semis, like he was so dominant that how could you not expect? And in bouldering, like him not doing that last boulder and still being in first place to qualify into the lead round is like, how do you not expect this guy to win? And knowing, if you know anything about Serato, knowing that he maybe has the highest climbing IQ in climbing competitions, period, and his passive strengths. Like I've done an entire podcast talking about like probably I think literally Serato. Like I think the passive things about him, his strength in specifically plastic climbing, his body positioning and his understanding of like how to do that, and his like beautiful output of efficiency. Like how is he not winning? I think the only reason why he didn't win. And yes, in saying that, I don't think Toby exactly like won. I think Serato didn't win, and Toby was the next guy to have that bid. So it's a strong statement there. I know that, but that's just my opinion. I think Toby won because Serato didn't win, and so something happened to Serato where one, he got robbed stylistically. I think, like I'm saying, if there was any other boulder number four, I think Serato would have had 100 points minus the falls. Um, and like literally any other style other than jumping to, and even on that boulder, I think he still could have done it. He was just dealing with his whole mental thing. Like he was constantly falling on these moves that I just don't think you would ever expect Sriracha to fall on. But the way that he's like, I look at eye contact in a lot of climbing athletes in competition. I've talked about that with like Nathaniel. I think just that loose eye contact. He was so laser focused on like what he was. He just like was just kind of jumping on and like maybe not fully taking his time and like yeah, it just didn't look like he was directing his body. I think he was letting himself into it. But this setting was so good that I think they were punishing that. I think they were literally punishing somebody who was just going to try to intuit. I think you needed to sit there, direct yourself, and intuit. And there's a like, if you're been climbing for a really long time, I think you know the difference. Like sometimes you just let yourself flow, and that's not the same thing as like knowing exactly what to focus on in those moments. And sometimes that even takes away the flow, so there's a really tough balance to be able to perform 100% of the time. That's why projecting is like so interesting. Or you can have 1,000 tries and like be capable of doing this boulder or this lead route, and you're not doing it because there's a beautiful mixture of flow and control that needs to happen. And those two things kind of fight each other. And so in that moment, in that competition, I think, yeah, Toby to me seems like somebody who's not always intuiting all the time. I think he's someone who's like over controlling all of the time, which is just showcases his ability to do that, but not always intuiting everything all the time. And Serato's kind of opposite of that. Well, it slipped, and I think Serato didn't win.
Dude, we go into that whole concept of flowing versus controlling. I don't, hopefully what you just said gets across to everyone, because that's a really complex topic, but really interesting. And I just want to revisit Serato's, that idea that Serato lost, not so much. Yeah. Oh, that's so brutal. Cause dude, Toby also has strength in spades. Like he's
Yes.
got that kind of Magos, like you've got the buffer, as we've referred to it before, just like
Yeah.
the buffer. And something that I don't know if you noticed, well, actually you definitely noticed this, but it's really subtle to watch someone like Serato and to see him slip and understand the difference between a slip that doesn't matter and a slip that's kind of atypical. And when I watched him, it happened on the lead route too, but I think it happened on the lead. I definitely remember watching him on the slab in bouldering and just thinking like, what's he doing, man? Like
Yeah.
that's not a slip. That there's, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe you
Yeah.
can describe it, but you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I don't think I could describe it super well either, but it's very similar to what I saw in Yanya as well. It's just like you're over controlling. You're not, and I mean, even Petra was saying this like in commentating. It's like it seems atypical. She was saying that like it looks like she's rushing. Yeah, it's sure it's all those words and many more. And like I would love to read Sarato's book one day and like have him explain to himself what he thought happened at those events. Like those conversations are super live. These are just me and Josh like talking about what we saw. And what I saw is what I said. I think he was so aware that this medal was in grasp for him and probably should be his. And I do want to take a step back and say what kind of reiterate what you said. Like I do think Toby has strength in spades and lots of other climbing metrics in spades. But that's not really what men's climbing competitions at this way. Just like we're talking about like women's climbing competitions aren't about who is the strongest woman rock climber out there. It's not about who's the best in those. Like, it's a conglomerate of a lot of different things that they're testing, and same in the men's. And I think the men's do it a little bit more accurately to what high level climbing is in the men's field. So it requires a lot of things. And if there was just a men's climbing finals event where you were looking at someone's ability, and I hope there's a climbing competition like that one day, because I think you'll see someone like Magos win that way more often. I think you'll see someone like Daniel Woods win that way more often. I think you'll see someone like Toby win that way more often. But you're not seeing that way more often right now, because you're seeing someone like you're seeing someone like Serato perform really well until his system is altered. So really the best way I can describe it without going, way too deep into my thoughts, is that I think Serato's, they're just names going back and forth. I think Serato's system to compete was somehow altered. And I'm just making an assumption that it was the medal and the stakes and his expectations, which is something that I coach regularly. Like, it's something that it's a conversation that I have with every single one of my athletes almost every single time that we talk about things is, well, where was your state of neutrality? And like, yeah, I'm going to argue that, any of his systems and metrics were not at a neutral place. And I could have expected that. And I watched it. It's kind of what I felt. And if he did, I don't know, he doesn't seem beatable.
Yeah, that idea of a comp that showcases just pure strength and showcases what Toby, I mean, I don't really know this. We don't really know this. My hunch is that
Yeah,
Toby is physically stronger than those other finalists. Just,
I would agree. Yeah.
whatever metric you want, however you want to define this, just, although I'm telling you, put him on the board with Daniel Woods, Magos. I want to see Noah in there too, man.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious what you think about strength and how it applies to competition in today's styles of competition. When I think about gymnastics and I think about the evolution of gymnastics, I know that sounds like I'm way off in left field, but just hear me out. Each sports do change and they reward different things. And gymnastics used to be very focused on really tight execution, very straight legs, very pointed toes. And you would see that, especially in the women, there'd be this body type that was very like long and thin. And the Russians had it in spades. They were kind of, and we did as well. Like Nastya Lukin was our Olympic all around gold medalist in like 2008. Very slender. I mean, clearly in great shape, but just very slender. If you look at the women's team now, they are
Mm.
muscular, and gymnastics is like go higher, flip more, twist more. I'm not saying their execution is bad. I'm just saying it's not as rewarded. And the body types, adapt to that, and the sport does. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It just is. And so what I'm curious about, when you think about men's strength and you think about competitions now, if we say took them all off the wall and we had some stupid test like who can hang on the beast maker middle hold with added weight or something, or who
Mm.
can do how many one arm pull-ups with added weight or something, do you think that there'd be a large variance? Do you think that there wouldn't be a large variance? Do you think that once you get to a certain level, it kind of doesn't matter? Like, how do you think about those objective metric strengths in today's competition scene?
Ooh, man, I wish I thought about this more, because I think I would have a deeper answer for you. But for sure, you would see a lot of metrics level out at a certain point, and then you see it doesn't affect climbing ability so much. And I'm not going to go into super specifics. But yeah, I think like you could get away with like certain things, like let's just say, for example, like all of these guys could probably squat to a certain degree, and maybe like a couple of these athletes can squat way harder, but that's not actually helping them in their climbing like that much more. This is kind of what my point there is. But what you will see that's, I think, very interesting, if you were to take this, crazy test, let's say the lattice test for comp climbers to some degree, and assuming the lattice test was testing exactly these metrics, which is, it would be super interesting to see one day. I think the thing that you would see that's very interesting is very specific metrics way higher than so many other climbers out there, especially rock climbers. And I would say that the people who are winning competitions, doing really well in competitions, have those things nailed. And what is my guess at those things? A mixture of hand strength in very varying degrees. I think I've shared a lot of this stuff actually on the podcast, is what my assumptions already are.
Hmm.
Connective strength, so that could come in the form of lots of core, lightness, to, the perception of lightness, and just the ability to be precise. And once you nail something with your feet, or like timing is a weird metric where like again, climbing is an interesting thing where, yeah, once you see someone, especially like Serato, do really really difficult climbing movements, it is because he's strong, but he's strong in like very specific ways, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So it's really hard to describe in words for me right now, but yeah, I think there are very specific metrics that are just miles and miles above many people and climbers out there.
You just reminded me of this thing Al Ronhel, the coach for one of the Olympic coaches for the USA, said on the podcast. He said, "Imagine I throw a pinch at you. Does it matter how strong you are at pinching? Like
Hmm.
it's timing, right? Is like it's not about
Yeah,
how strong you are at pinching." And I thought that was a
yeah.
really that always stuck out in my head as just being,
So
yeah.
yeah, to take that kind of visual, take that and put it onto the other hand and your feet at the same time, and then move them all around, all over and over again. And I think that's how I understand climbing to be in general. It's like your ability to use your body's strength in different positions and with different holds in relation to each other, and to know how to direct it. So basically, I think the real word there would be applied strength. Like, yes, specific strengths do matter, but the application of those specific strengths seem to matter just as much or more.
Okay, well, that's a great transition into something that you brought up over our text messages, where you said something along the lines of, boy, if I had to train for the Olympics right now, if I was a kid watching the Olympics and I decided that I wanted to go, it would be tough for me to know all of the things that I had to train. Or maybe I'm paraphrasing that a little bit wrong, but what do you mean by that?
I think uh, maybe it sounded more glorified to you than what I had actually meant it to be. What I really meant was, it was the same that I was kind of hitting on the whole conversation, which is, climbing is going in a direction, and I obviously have a lot of like critical takes on the direction that comp climbing is going. I'm really happy and proud of like what a lot of the rest of our pioneers of our sport are doing, like out there with watching, yeah, like Keen and Zach Gala, like Nathaniel and Sean, and a lot of climbing things like Zach Aiden, Katie. I can't name enough of them. I'm really happy with where climbing's pioneers are pushing the sport, and even in competition, yeah, seeing like Colin and Serato and Toby and Yanya and Brooke and other impressive athletes out there. I think it's awesome to see the level that they're pushing it at, but the format, the setting style, uh, like you can't ever predict it, and that might be the fun of the game for sure. But you kind of can predict what you're supposed to train if you're trying to be a sprinter. I think you can predict what you're trying to train if you're trying to become the best swimmer in the world. You just have to work really hard. Even if you want to be a gymnast or even a dancer or something like that. And again, it's very overgeneralized. And Josh, you're right. You said this before. I don't know those sports, but I can have a hunch that if I was 5 years old and like just said, all right, my life is going to be to become X, the best at whatever sport. In most other sports, I would feel a lot more comfortable knowing like what that entailed. And eventually I would either make it or burn out because it was just too hard for me. Or I wasn't, yeah, just like wasn't capable or into it or like whatever it was. In climbing, you could not only just like do that and eventually be really good at it and not get that return, which is something that we've had that conversation in a lot of times, like speaking to Dave Burleson's podcast, Sean Bailey's podcast, like those are really strong conversations. But then also specifically in competition, yeah, like who knows what that looks like? Like what would I direct a 5-year-old to do right now if I said, do you want to win the Olympics, 15 years from now? Like I actually don't know. And that's a frustration for me as a coach. It's a frustration for me as a competitor, and that's really what the topic was that I was bringing up. And it's a frustration even working with athletes like nowadays, where they're upset because they work really hard. Like they work really hard. I know that. We have guesses at what the hard work is supposed to entail at the end of it. We also work heavily, knowing me, we work heavily on how to apply that in high pressure performance moments. What gets in your way in order to do that? I'm super proud, just to take this moment, I'm super proud of what a lot of the athletes that I work with do in order to work on that. But then at the end of the day, they just like might not get that return. And that's super frustrating. It's super sad. And that I think that actually just is what I'm talking about with this. And so that all being said, I mean, between you and me, Josh, like I am hopefully in my lifetime gonna work on that, and I won't share anything more than that. But hopefully I'll be in a position where I can work on that to be able to provide more to that side of the sport. I don't want to just sit here and like just berate it and like just talk smack about what I see and like all that. It's not necessarily my intent. It's to provide some insight into what I am seeing so that one day, like if we're in a position to provide more than that, climbers can be super excited. Like that's I'm trying to share like all sides of it where like as a spectator, as an athlete myself, and as a coach, it's actually overall like kind of just frustrating.
Between you and me and everyone listening, let me know if you want me to edit that out, Tim. Uh, okay, that was actually really interesting for me because I don't know if I totally agreed or understood what you were saying until you just listed that out. And when you did bring up those other sports, and
Mm,
I actually thought you used those sports as a perfect analogy here, and it really helped me understand because if you want to be, if you say, "Hey, I'm going to beat Usain Bolt's time," you go, "Okay, like, well, what I need to do is run faster than Usain Bolt." Like it sounds hilarious, and there's like a bunch of different paths to get there. You might
yeah.
say, "Yeah, but do I squat? Do I do jumps? Do I
Am I
just
tall enough? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
well, there may be a bunch of paths there, and that is TBD, and it is your own journey to go on. That's that journey from good to great. That's unique for everyone. But to win, you have to run faster, and that's a very clear metric. And even in gymnastics, you set up routines and then you practice them and then you need to execute them. And if you wanted to be better than Simone Biles, what you would do is you would do another twist. You would say, "Oh, you did a double, actually she did like a triple twisting double." Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to do a quad twisting double back. Like, like this is objectively more difficult. We've heard this from Adam Andra. We've heard this from a lot of, I mean, on this pod, talking to Nathaniel, there's a lot of people who become disenchanted with the competition scene because they don't feel like there is a clear connection between their abilities and the results. And then you also are pointing out that with the amount of changes that occur in the sport, for whatever reason, it could be for better highlight reels on the TV,
yeah,
whatever. I'm not even going to be negative about it. I'm just saying, like, we don't know. But that is an interesting point you make where if you're sitting here right now and you're 10 years old and you're listening to us and you decide that you want to be Olympic gold medalist, I mean, get strong, practice, but
yeah,
you might show up on the day and be in the best strength of your life and be better than anyone else. And the setting's just not for you that day. And that's
right.
kind of heavy, man. That's a little weird.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I think in any sport, this is where like because I'll hear the other argument a lot where it's like, well, climbing is an expression sport. Climbing is about your own personal journey, relative to what you can do and stuff. And it's like, well,
No, dude, that's
it is
like
also
skateboarding or something. That's like where you get like a
sure.
random score on. Sorry, I shouldn't.
And
Wait. I don't know anything about skateboarding or other. I'm doing the same thing
but
as
it's
you.
actually but it's actually a great example because I do watch a ton of skateboarding and I love it. And in skateboarding too, I would argue that there's a much stronger understanding. I'm not saying they understand it, but there's a much stronger understanding of what is objectively difficult. And they have a scoring system that at least tries to marry that concept where, okay, yeah, we don't know exactly that
I
this
was
trick is
saying,
harder on this
well,
obstacle.
I was actually saying the opposite, where it's difficult in these sports that kind of give a subjective score where they're like, you got a 92. Like, what the heck does that mean? And,
Right.
it's like, well, the judges just didn't like that kind of trick. And they do try to categorize. I mean, this happens in gymnastics too. They try to categorize a trick
Yeah.
like that's a D level skill, or that's an E level skill, and that has a certain point value. But something that's
Yeah.
really interesting is that if you're talking to a 5-year-old, they've shown that what gives people the best self-esteem, the sports that lead to the best outcomes for the athletes as they grow up, as far as like it contributes to their life in a positive way, i.e. like gives them self-esteem, like I am proud
Yeah.
of X, Y, and Z, are those sports that have black and white outcomes
Hmm.
versus subjective scoring, because it can be, and so, climbing, even though it has objective scoring, I think what you're saying is that the route setting makes it a subjective experience
the
anyways.
the way that we use the route setting, the way that we select the route setting, that's what. So because yeah, so basically we had a interesting conversation one time in Europe where it was Sean and Nathaniel and Ben Hanna, and they had already been talking about this I think before. I don't think Ben Hanna was there, but they'd said they were talking about it where they think that climbing should be much more like skateboarding, where there are judges who are historically legendary and just objectively some of the best skaters of all time. Those are the judges. And so skateboarding is a little bit different because the format is like an obstacle that people do tricks on, where like climbing isn't really like that. But there are many degrees of objectives of subjective scoring that can become objective, and we can agree as the masses. And maybe that's where, I'm not saying that's where it should go. I'm just saying that that's another path. Like that's a totally another option that seemingly maybe more agreeable, you know? And
All right.
surfing works like that a little bit more, by the way. Like, sorry, just one more thing to share. Like I watched surfing in the Olympics. I didn't understand it whatsoever. But something that was interesting was that there was 12 judges in this sport that I couldn't really understand. But it's like, well, maybe that's the way that they understand it. Maybe that's the way that they can agree that scoring becomes a little bit more objective that way. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reining us back in because it's a wild topic that, but something I do want to point out because people may be listening, being like and thinking to themselves, "What does Tim know?" Right? Like, who is Tim to
Yeah,
critique? But
fair.
who Tim was just bringing up: Nathaniel Coleman, Olympic silver medalist; Sean Bailey, one of the best climbers alive right now. Like, give him a climb and put someone else next to him, my money's on Sean 999 times out of a
Dude.
thousand. And so, just for people listening, I think that it's good to highlight that the conversations that are going on behind the scenes are from people who are experienced and have been there. And I think it's fun to share these. And I want to also say that I absolutely love the Olympics. I really did, Tim. I don't mind you poking at it, and hopefully I didn't come off overly optimistic. Dude, sometimes I get that critique. People give me crap.
Mm.
They're like, Josh, like you're too happy or you're too nice or like you're not like critiquing people enough. I'm like, dude, no, I actually really you can have both at the same time. You can really enjoy something and see that there's issues. And so
I
um
agree.
I love that you picked it apart. And I mean, I think you do it in a good faith manner, as do even some of these other higher level previous competitors. I think they still have a love of the game, and it's just when you love something and you know every little thing about it. And so I appreciate you kind of picking it apart for us.
Yeah, no, I super appreciate you having me on here, man. Like, I think the thing that hopefully came across to at least some degree is that I also really love the Olympics and I just respect it so much and I respect high level sports in general and I respect the highest level of our sport for sure. And that's what was frustrating. That's something I didn't feel like I got to see. And in some ways, like these people who make the choices to make these games have the control to be able to showcase that. I don't. I can sit here and talk on a podcast, but they have, some degree of control, which means they have a lot of responsibility to pay attention to like what ends up, a result one way or another. But that all being said, our shout outs were our shout outs. And dude, like, I mean, I got the Olympic feels anyway watching it, like it was sick. It was awesome.
The Olympic feels. Well, Tim, I'm looking forward to in 4 years talking about this about LA 2028. And I'm also really curious. Maybe this information is already out there, but I am curious to see what they do with medals and if we got more. And it's always a good sign. Again, I think it was a good showing, and we clearly had good enough showing in 2020 to well stick around, as not all sports do, and get an extra medal. And say what you want about some people. Some people are really critical about where climbing is going and like the gamification of climbing or just all of this stuff. And I really think it's dumb. And I really think it's myopic that they think that there's only one way to climb and it's some kind of traditional way. And whether it's plastic that you love, boards that you love, I don't see how you can not love the Olympics. If you're some crusty aid climbing mountaineer and you think the Olympics are dumb, screw you. Like, this was a blast. And yeah, I like seeing I like seeing our sport do well in the limelight and grow because I love it and I want it to grow. I want to keep on sharing it.
Yeah, for sure. Did you see that breakdancing is not going to be in the 2020? It's like that could
That's what I
happen,
was
man, if
thinking of. Yeah.
we don't do this right. Like we could lose it in the Olympics, like, and breakdancing, yeah, I think I don't know anything about it other than watching it. But it's like, yeah, how would you score that, right? Like that seems so difficult to see. Like
And
there's
Tim,
so many different styles, right?
if we lost the Olympics, what would we have to do? We'd have to just go rock climbing and stuff. Ah, oh, what a bummer. Yeah.
No.
um, one last note I wanted to say, and then we'll wrap it up. I was watching right before we hopped on here because the men's final was less fresh in my head. I pulled up Adam Ondra's burn on lead, watched it, and I see him getting near the top on the blue holds. They're thin, and you can hear him yell. It's not, he's not close by, but you can hear Adam Ondra yell. I was just, fuck yeah. Like
Yeah.
that
I
was a
can't
cool moment. I just like that one got me.
I can't believe we didn't talk about Adam on the bouldering round too. Like there was a lot of
Mm.
similarity that I felt about Imori that we didn't cover everything, guys. Like don't pretend that we, covered everything that we saw or felt. But yeah, hopefully we got some stuff that hopefully you guys made it this far. I know that was a lot of like deep nuanced thoughts. But
Tim,
yeah,
what do you mean
Josh.
this far? We could go another 2 hours. I'm tired. I have to go make dinner for the family. I will say that I was a little bummed Almondra didn't medal because he is one of the best climbers the sport has ever seen.
Yeah.
He hangs it out there. He tried hard. We all love him, and he had a beautiful showing on lead. I read somewhere that they they think that if lead has a separate medal in LA, that Adam Ondra will try for that. But he's getting old,
Oh,
man.
sick. Yeah,
I
he is
don't know
getting
that
older.
that's like
Yeah.
total. That's like hearsay. That's not from Adam Ondra himself. But just when I read
Sure.
that, I was like, oh, that's a good guess. I wouldn't be surprised if he
Yeah.
tries to come back and win a lead only medal, and I wouldn't be surprised if he can pull off even 4 years from now. And yeah, we didn't say much about him other than he didn't do so well in bouldering and he did really well in lead, and that's not that surprising. But always a little upsetting to see one of the sport's greats not achieve a Olympic medal so far. Where if you are to look at his Wikipedia page in 50 years, it would be a glaring miss. You'd be like, Adam Ondra didn't win an Olympic medal? Huh, that's Adam Ondra.
What the heck? That's what I'm saying. It's like, what? It doesn't make any sense. All
Okay,
right.
Tim, do you have a pro tip to bring us home with?
I did, but actually, I would like to not share it because it's pretty like deep and climbing stuff. It's like climbing sequential stuff. Don't worry about it. It'll come up another time. Um, it won't fit here to close.
Okay, then I'll ask you instead a tiny little quick question. Men's bouldering number 3, that quote unquote power boulder that we thought was the coolest one. How hard do you think that boulder was, Jim?
Ooh, minimum V12, like without a doubt. I wouldn't be surprised if they said it felt like 13 to 14. I wouldn't be surprised. It looks so hard.
Okay,
Yeah,
that makes me feel my V12 was what I thought as well. It's of course everyone listen, we don't know, but as route setters and as climbers, you kind of just get this feeling. Like when you see a
yeah,
climb, I feel I don't know about you, Tim, but I have these like a number just always pops in my head. I'm like, oh,
yeah. Me too.
it's like V12. Like I
Yeah,
don't know where that came from. It just kind of it's V12. And
I have numbers and then I have doubts. I'm like, it can't be because of, I did the same thing for the roots. I'm like, oh, it couldn't be because of how someone looked, like how somewhere, or the whole size of the hold or the distance or like whatever it is.
it was crazy for me to hear you think that men's final route was potentially 14 plus, but then you got to think that Alamandra has and other competitors, maybe not in the finals, have on-sided 14D and other. I mean, dude, hasn't Jesse on-sided 14C and he wasn't even in finals? Anyways,
Yeah,
that's also on rock where with plastic,
I was
you
gonna
just
say,
you just know it's more like a flash. And
I was gonna
Andra has
say that.
flashed 15A, so that
Yeah,
makes sense, dude.
yeah. I
Wild.
mean, I was gonna say it could be harder. Like if you thought I was crazy for saying that, just keep in mind that it's plastic, and there's a lot of varying degrees that happen. Like you're not tied in for a competition when you're trying to on-site rocks outside. You're not tied in. Yeah, you're not. You don't have like preview with multiple people usually when you're trying to. And these guys have done that on like 14D. Andres flashed a 15A, so there's a potential for these guys to be flashing and on-siting on these competitions harder than 14D. So and just like in person, I've seen some World Cup lead routes. That's some that I've tried that I could even tell you a more accurate grade. And these people just look like it's kind of a warm up for them. And I don't think I've tried. I don't think I've tried easier than a 14A at a World Cup qualifier. These guys sometimes look like they're warming up on it. So yeah, I'm not surprised if it's 14D or harder, and you can ask some of them, and I've heard them say that they're 14D or harder.
Okay, that was even better than that pro tip. Thanks, Tim. Loved it.
All right.
All right. Well, I hope we have another emergency pod soon, whatever the heck that means, and come back again soon, bud. Loved having you on here.
I will. Thanks for having me on, and yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right. Take care, Tim.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.